In the dim hush of a late hour, imagine yourself wandering through a museum that is almost closed, the last footsteps fading into distant galleries. The lights are softer now, halos rather than spotlights, and the glass cases glow like lanterns. Behind each pane of glass, an object waits: a chipped bowl, a bronze figure, a fragment of painted wood worn by centuries of touch. They are perfectly still, and yet some part of you feels that they are not entirely asleep. Your gaze lingers on a single relic without knowing why. Perhaps it is a small amulet, the stone worn smooth where a thumb has passed again and again. Perhaps it is a mask with hollow eyes that never quite look away. You cannot hear its story, but you sense that it has one, and that it has been telling it silently for a very long time. Like a stranger across a room whose posture alone suggests secrets, the object seems to hold itself with a kind of presence. Wherever human hands have lived, they have left objects behind. Some are practical, meant to be used and forgotten. Others feel different, even when their original purpose has vanished. They carry the weight of repetition, prayers whispered over them, fears confided to them, hopes pressed into their surface like invisible fingerprints. With every generation, another layer of meaning sinks in, until the relic feels less like an item and more like a small, self-contained world. Even in modern spaces, where labels try to pin them down with dates and names, these relics resist being reduced to facts. A plaque may tell you where they were found, which people shaped them, what materials were used. Yet as you stand there in the half-light, your mind drifts to questions that the printed words cannot answer. Who reached for this object in the dark? What unspoken bargain did they believe they were making with the universe? In the quiet between your heartbeat and the distant hum of the building, you may feel that the object is watching you as carefully as you are watching it. Not with eyes, not with a mind, but with the simple fact of its survival. It has outlived storms and fire. It has waited in the earth, in ruined houses, in shipwrecks, in sealed tombs, until someone found it and carried it into this pool of artificial light. Its existence is a message that slipped past time's attempt to erase it. As you move on, the feeling follows you. The sense that some objects never fully sleep. They wait in darkness and glass, in boxes under beds, in drawers that are rarely opened. They keep the shape of the hands that held them, the weight of the stories that clung to them. As you drift deeper into this night of relics, you begin to wonder whether you are simply looking at them, or whether you have just stepped into the long, unbroken dream they have been dreaming all along. Belief settles into objects the way dust settles onto shelves, quietly, gradually, almost without notice. A small charm carried in a pocket begins as nothing more than metal or stone, yet after years of being held during moments of doubt or hope, it starts to feel heavier than its size suggests. Not heavier in weight, but in meaning. The human mind has a way of pouring its inner life into simple things. Until the object becomes a vessel for emotions we never quite learned how to say aloud. Think of a ring that belonged to a grandparent, or a faded photograph tucked carefully into a wallet. These objects are not powerful in any measurable way, yet they radiate something unmistakable. When you hold them, you can almost feel the warmth of hands that are no longer here, the echo of voices you can't entirely recall, but somehow still hear. The object becomes a bridge, connecting days long gone with the one you're living now. Its value is stitched from memory, longing, and love, all invisible threads that give shape to something far greater than the material itself. Now imagine an ancient relic passed through dozens of generations. Each pair of hands adds a new story, a new fear, a new hope. Someone might have clutched it during a storm, believing it would keep their family safe. Someone else might have whispered a promise into it before a long journey. Another might have offered it to a child as protection or comfort. With time, the object drinks in these hopes the way wood drinks in oil. It begins to feel alive, not because it changed, but because the people did. And this layering of belief is not limited to grand relics kept behind glass. Even the smallest personal tokens hold a kind of quiet influence. A keychain carried for luck, a smooth pebble picked up on a beach during a moment you wanted to remember, a piece of jewelry worn during a turning point in your life. These items shape us in subtle ways, guiding decisions, soothing worries, reminding us of who we were and who we hoped to become. When you consider relics from ancient temples or long-buried tombs, the distance between their world and yours begins to shrink. Those objects, too, were once touched by ordinary people, struggling with ordinary fears. They held them tightly when the night felt too long. They pressed them to their lips when they needed courage. They offered them to the gods when they had no other way to speak their heart. Over time, the relics became saturated with meaning, not because they possessed inherent power, but because countless lives leaned on them. So the question lingers, softly and without urgency. Where does the power truly lie? Is it in the relic itself, carved or forged or shaped with intention? Or is it in the belief poured into it, drop by drop, like water filling a cup over centuries? As you drift deeper into this story, you may find that the boundary between object and story grows thin. Perhaps the power we sense is simply the reflection of everything humanity has ever hoped for, resting quietly in the palm of your hand. Long before stories were written, before symbols had names, there were nights when the world felt impossibly large and unbearably dark. Picture a small circle of early humans gathered around a fire, the only island of light in a sea of shadow. The flames sway like living creatures, painting moving shapes across the walls of a cave or the rough trunks of sheltering trees. Beyond the glow, the night watches back, filled with sounds they cannot place and dangers they cannot see. In that fragile circle of warmth, fear becomes a silent companion, settling beside them like another member of the tribe. To soften that fear, they reached for the materials closest to them. Bones left over from a hunt, smooth river stones, shells that glimmered like pale moons. At first, they were only objects, picked up absent-mindedly, turned over in calloused hands. But somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, someone scratched a mark into bone, not decoration, but something deeper, a gesture meant to ask for protection or luck. Another carved a familiar pattern into stone, tracing the path of an animal they hoped to follow tomorrow. Someone else tied a shell around their wrist because the soft rattle made them feel less alone in the dark. These small choices, half instinct, half imagination, began shaping the earliest talismans. They were not yet relics, not yet sacred, but they were becoming more than what they had been. They were transforming into anchors, something to grip when the night pressed in too closely. And as the fire crackled, those objects absorbed the breath of stories whispered across flames, the rhythm of chants rising like smoke, the warmth of bodies leaning close for comfort. Each mark carved into bone was a conversation with the invisible. Each scratched line carried a quiet plea. Keep us safe, guide our steps, help us see what the dark hides. Early humans had no written language, Yet these objects became their first vocabulary, a way to give shape to emotions too vast to speak aloud. Over time, patterns repeated, marks sharpened, techniques refined. What began as instinct became tradition, and what began as fear became meaning. Imagine someone pressing a carved stone into the hand of a child before a long journey, telling them it would bring good fortune. Imagine a hunter tying a decorated bone around their neck, believing it would steady their aim. Imagine a gatherer keeping a shell engraved with simple lines because it reminded them of the ocean they left behind. These small exchanges carried the weight of belief, linking each generation with the next in an unbroken chain of hope. And so the question emerges, soft and hazy as smoke. When does an object become more than itself? Is it when the first mark is carved, the first prayer whispered, the first moment someone carries it, not for what it is, but for what it represents? Somewhere along the edge of firelight, that transformation happens. A stone becomes a guardian. A bone becomes a promise. A shell becomes a memory, held tenderly against the unknown night. In their hands, the earliest relics were born, not from magic, but from the simple, persistent desire to feel less alone beneath the vast and ancient sky. There is a quiet moment in every life when an object feels heavier than it should, when it seems to hum with something beyond its shape or purpose. Perhaps it happens when you find an old letter tucked into a drawer, or when your fingers brush a pendant that belonged to someone you still miss. In that instant, a thread forms, as thin as breath, yet strong enough to tug at the heart. It is the same thread that once connected people and relics across thousands of years, a delicate filament woven from memory, touch, and unspoken longing. Imagine those earliest hands, rough with work and weather, passing a carved bone from one person to another. The object holds warmth for a moment before cooling. That warmth is not just physical. It is a trace of presence, of emotion, of everything that person carried inside them. When the bone changes hands, the warmth lingers. The next person adds their own imprint, their own hopes and fears, layered invisibly atop the last. Over generations, those layers build into something that feels almost alive, though no breath stirs within it. Even now, when you stand before an ancient relic behind glass, some part of you senses this weight, the accumulated touch of lives long gone. These objects witnessed laughter, sorrow, fear, and devotion. Some were kissed before journeys. Some were held tightly during storms. Some were kept close in moments of grief, when words failed, and only the feel of a familiar object could steady trembling thoughts. Their surfaces are worn, not just by physical touch, but by the emotional tides that once flowed through the hands that held them. It is easy to forget that every relic was once ordinary. A stone plucked from a river, a bead shaped during an afternoon of quiet work, a figurine carved to soothe tired minds at the end of a long day. But the moment it begins to matter, truly matter, something shifts. The thread forms. The object becomes a companion, a witness, a keeper of stories. And even when the people who cherished it vanish, the thread remains, thin but unbroken, stretching through time until it reaches someone new who feels its pull. In many cultures, objects were believed to remember. Not consciously, not in the way we remember names or faces, but through the simple act of enduring. They held echoes, faint, like the last note of a song hanging in the air long after the musicians have left. Those echoes shaped how the living approached each relic, with reverence or fear or tenderness, depending on the stories woven into it. Yet the mystery lingers, gentle but persistent. Can an object truly recall the hands that held it? Or is the memory only within us, projected outward, reflected back? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere between. Perhaps memory drifts like dust, settling onto surfaces that have been loved or feared or treasured, waiting for someone else to come close enough to feel the faint stir of recognition. And so the thread stretches on, connecting you, for a moment, to people you will never meet, through objects that never needed words to speak. In the soft half-light of a world untouched by cities, imagine a figure standing beside a river that has carved its patience through stone for thousands of years. The water moves with an unhurried certainty, smoothing everything it touches, rounding sharp edges into gentle curves. Along the shore, scattered among driftwood and reeds, lie stones that have traveled farther than any person alive, carried from mountains to valley, from valley to sea. To most eyes, they are only part of the landscape, but to one pair of hands, tonight, a single stone is about to become something more. The fingers that reach for it are calloused, shaped by work and weather. They close around a pebble that sits neatly in the palm, cool and solid, its surface worn to a satin softness by years of water and sand. It is pleasing to hold. Its weight is comforting, a small counterpoint to the vast uncertainty of the sky overhead. The person turns it over, again and again, feeling the way it fits against the curve of their thumb, how it almost seems to greet their touch, rather than resist it. Around the fire later, others notice. The stone is passed from hand to hand, each person testing its weight, feeling the strange rightness of it. There is no word yet for luck, for charm, for talisman, but something like those ideas moves quietly through the group. Before sleep, someone ties the stone to a strip of leather and loops it around their neck. The gesture is simple, almost casual, yet it carries a new, unspoken belief that this small piece of the river will stay with them when they leave its banks behind. Days turn into seasons, and still the stone rests against warm skin, brushed by clothing, tapped thoughtfully when doubt creeps in. It witnesses storms, hunts, arguments, laughter, the long silences of travel. It lies close to a beating heart in moments of fear, and close to steady breaths in moments of rest. Slowly, the person stops thinking of it as a stone from the river and begins to think of it as their stone, their companion, their unseen shield against the unpredictable moods of the world. In this way, the first amulets of stone are born, not from spells or formal rituals, but from the quiet decision to keep close what feels safe to touch. As others notice, they too begin to search the riverbanks and hillsides for stones that speak to their hands, trusting shape and weight and a feeling they cannot name. Before long, the world is scattered with these small guardians, polished by skin and story, carrying within their silence the first human attempts to hold on to something steady in a world that never stops moving. And if you could hold one of those stones now, turning it slowly between your fingers, you might feel the faint echo of all those lives, like distant footsteps crossing a bridge of time to reach you tonight. Picture a field at the edge of dawn, the grass beaded with cold dew, the sky still holding the last faint stars. Out of the mist rise shapes that do not move, do not breathe, yet command the eye as if they were watching. Tall stones stand in circles or lonely lines, their surfaces roughened by rain and centuries. They are rooted in the earth more deeply than any tree, and unlike trees, they never sleep, keeping their vigil through every season without closing their unseen eyes. To walk among them is to feel yourself measured against an older rhythm. Your footsteps sound small on the damp ground, while the stones tower above with patient indifference. Some lean slightly toward one another, as if in conversation. Others stand apart like solitary sentinels, facing horizons chosen with a care we no longer fully grasp. Long ago, hands hauled them into place with ropes and sheer determination, hearts fixed on some purpose that mattered more than comfort, more than time. Perhaps those hands believed they were arranging a meeting place between sky and earth. On certain nights and mornings, when the sun or moon reaches a particular point in the sky, its light threads perfectly through gaps between stones or rests directly upon a chosen surface. Shadows stretch with uncanny precision, tracing lines across the ground as if obeying instructions carved into the air. For those who first watched these alignments, it must have seemed that the stones were responding, that they knew when to catch the light and when to release it. In such moments, the stones ceased to be mere rock and became instruments, tuned to the movements of the heavens. Around these standing stones, people gathered for reasons now mostly forgotten: to mark the turning of the year, to honor the dead, to ask for guidance, to celebrate survival. Fires burned at their feet, songs rose into the chill air, and stories grew like vines around their unyielding forms. The stones watched it all. They watched children become elders, watched fashions of belief and ritual shift like clouds, watched entire communities fade away while they remained. Each new generation approached them with fresh questions, yet the stones answered only with silence and shadow. If you could stand there now, in that old field swallowed by mist, you might feel what those early visitors felt, a subtle sense that you are not entirely alone. The stones do nothing, yet they have seen everything. They have met every face that ever turned toward them, and they remember in the only way stone can remember, by staying. In their stillness, they blur the boundary between object and presence, between landscape and witness, becoming sleepless guardians who keep their reasons locked inside their ancient, weather-worn skin. And if you were to rest your back against one, feeling its chill press through cloth and skin, you might imagine that some trace of those countless meetings lingers there, a quiet awareness leaning back into you even now. Move closer now, until the towering shapes of stone give way to the intimate landscape of their surfaces. What seemed from afar like simple gray walls are, at arm's length, crowded with small ridges, cracks, and deliberate lines. Under fingertips, you can feel shallow grooves where someone, long ago, pressed a tool into the rock again and again, leaving behind more than decoration. These are the carved symbols, the patient scratches of a people who wanted their voices to outlast their breath. Some of the marks are simple circles or lines, repeated with variations that once meant something precise. Others twist into spirals, branching shapes, or patterns that suggest eyes, animals, or paths. To the people who carved them, these forms were not abstract. They held instructions for rituals, reminders of agreements, maps of sacred places, invocations to unseen powers. Every cut into the stone was an act of intention, a small defiance against forgetting. The rock, so slow to change, became a willing archive for a language spoken in lines and curves. Now, centuries or millennia later, we stand before the same marks with only fragments of understanding. Specialists debate whether a symbol meant harvest, or ancestor, or sun. Some patterns may be copied from older traditions, whose meanings were already fading, even as the last strokes were carved. Bits of knowledge surface from buried records or parallel cultures, but much remains shrouded. The stone has kept the shapes, but not the key to unlock them. What was once as clear as speech has become a puzzle missing half its pieces. There is a strange ache in looking at a message you know was meant to be understood and realizing that you cannot answer it. It is like receiving a letter in an unknown script from someone who cared deeply about what they wrote. You can see the emphasis, the repetition, the places where they pressed harder or worked longer. You can sense urgency or reverence, the importance of conveying something that mattered. But the content itself has slipped away, leaving only its outline behind. Still, the power of these symbols has not entirely vanished. Visitors trace them with their eyes, sometimes unconsciously mirroring the motions of the original carvers. Children imagine stories to fill the silence, weaving new meanings over old shapes. The stone does not protest. It simply continues to bear the weight of whatever we project onto it. In this way, the carved symbols become both relics and mirrors, reflecting our need to connect with minds that have disappeared. As you stand there, letting your gaze travel over each worn groove, you may wonder whether meaning is ever truly lost, or only waiting for a new way to be heard. The forgotten tongues sleep within the stone, yet their presence is undeniable. A reminder that long before you arrived, someone else stood here, reaching across time in the only way they knew. Their unanswered message hangs in the air, fragile yet enduring, like breath on cold glass. There are moments in life when the boundary between safety and danger feels paper-thin. The hush after a child's first cry, the last breath of an elder, the instant before sleep when the mind drifts into darkness. In many places and times, people answered that fragility with stone. A small rock placed on a grave, a line of stones above a doorway, a single smooth pebble laid beneath a pillow. Each gesture quiet, each intent the same, to ask the world to be gentle. Imagine a modest dwelling of earth and wood, its doorframe worn by countless hands. Above it, a cluster of stones has been carefully arranged, pressed into place with more care than their rough appearance suggests. Each stone was chosen for how it felt in the hand, for the time and place where it was found, for the memory it already carried. Together, they form a silent arch of guardianship, watching everyone who passes beneath. Those who live inside might touch the stones in passing, scarcely noticing the habit, yet always reassured by their presence. At the bedside of the very young or the very old, stones appear again. One might rest on a small table, another beneath a cradle leg, another tucked into a pouch tied to the bed frame. They are cool to the touch, satisfyingly solid in a world where breath can falter without warning. To an outsider, they are just stones. To those who place them, they are anchors in a sea of uncertainty, small promises that the soul will not be snatched away without resistance. Each stone says without words, "We have done what we can." Graves, too, invite these quiet offerings. A visitor kneels, chooses a stone from the ground, and sets it carefully on the earth above a loved one. Over time, the mound grows not in height, but in meaning. Each new stone, a mark of remembrance. Seasons pass, rain, snow, heat, and still the stones remain, even when flowers wither and wooden markers fade. They are not grand monuments. They are small, steadfast witnesses to a bond that refuses to erode. In all these rituals, the stones themselves do nothing. They do not move. They do not shine. They do not speak. Yet their arrangement, their continued presence, shapes how people feel in the spaces they guard. A threshold with stones above it feels more protected. A grave with stones upon it feels less abandoned. A bed watched over by a chosen pebble feels less exposed to whatever roams the night. The power is subtle, almost entirely born from belief, yet the comfort it brings is undeniably real. As you picture these scenes, the doorway, the bedside, the grave, you may sense how deeply humans have always needed small, tangible acts to answer the vastness of fate. The stones are simple, ordinary, everywhere. And yet, when placed with intention, they become companions at the edges of life, standing in for the protection we wish we could offer one another forever. Still, they quietly remain. If you step back in your mind and let the images soften, you can see all these stones at once. The amulet warmed by a beating heart, the standing circle crowned with mist, the carved symbols fading on ancient walls, the humble markers above beds and graves. They dot the landscape of human history, like stars scattered across a dark sky, each one a small point of contact between fear and hope. From riverbanks to hilltops, from doorways to tombs, stone has been our patient companion, listening without judgment as we ask the world to be kinder than it often is. Over time, hands grow more skilled. The same impulse that chose one stone from many, because it felt right, because it seemed to answer some unspoken need, begins to shape stone with greater intention. Edges are smoothed not only by rivers, but by tools. Surfaces are flattened for more intricate carvings. Stones are placed with increasing precision, aligned with solstices, stars, and sightlines that turn the earth itself into a quiet instrument of meaning. What began as instinctive comfort becomes a developing language of craft. Yet the heart of the relationship does not change. People still reach for stone when words are not enough. They still press their worries into its unyielding surface, still ask it to stand where they cannot always stand, to remember what they fear forgetting. The amulet worn at the chest, the monolith at the horizon's edge, the pebble on the grave, they all answer the same question in different ways. How do we anchor ourselves in a world that moves, shifts, and eventually takes everything back? As you follow this stone path in your imagination, you may notice how natural it feels to move from one form to another. The small charm suggests larger guardians. The carved symbols suggest more complex stories. The protective stones at thresholds suggest doors that might someday open into more mysterious spaces. Each step is a progression, not a break. A slow, patient refinement of the human urge to pour meaning into matter. Standing here, at the edge of this chapter, you can sense that stone is only the beginning. Once humans learn that the world can be shaped, that earth can be carved and arranged to reflect inner hopes, other materials begin to call. Metal glints in the firelight, promising new possibilities. The sky reveals that it sometimes sends its own strange stones down to the ground. Craftsmen and dreamers will not be able to ignore such invitations. For now, though, let the image linger, a hand closing around a chosen stone, feeling that first subtle shift from object to ally. From this simple gesture, entire traditions will grow. Paths will be marked, shrines built, graves honored, and destinies imagined. And as you prepare to leave the realm of stone behind, you do so knowing that every step into deeper mystery began with something as small and quiet as a pebble cradled in the curve of a human palm. It begins here. Long before people understood the sky, they feared it and adored it in equal measure. By day, it blazed with a sun that could warm or scorch. By night, it unfolded into an ocean of stars, each one a tiny ember trembling in the dark. But on rare, unforgettable nights, the sky broke its silence. A streak of fire tore across its velvet surface, trailing sparks like falling embers from a distant forge. People stopped whatever they were doing, gathering grain, tending fires, whispering stories, to watch in breathless wonder. And sometimes, after days or months or even years, they found what the sky had dropped. Imagine standing on barren ground after a storm, the air still smelling of rain and iron. You notice a stone unlike any other, darker, heavier, strangely warm at its core, even though the air bites with cold. It is as if the ground itself is holding its breath around it. The stone feels dense in the hand, as though it contains a world folded tightly inside. It doesn't resemble the soft gray of river rocks or the sharp edges of mountain stone. Instead, it carries a metallic sheen, almost like a bruise, as if the galaxy left fingerprints upon it. In early times, such a stone would not be considered ordinary. How could it be? It arrived from nowhere humans had walked, from a place beyond storms, beyond mountains, beyond even the imagination of those who first touched it. When the elders gathered, they would pass the object between them, weighing it, listening to its silence, sensing something uncanny beneath its surface. Some believed it was a fragment of a shattered star. Others whispered that it was a message, or a sign, or even a sliver of a god's weapon, broken during some celestial battle. Around small fires, people built stories around the fallen stone. Children were told it held the breath of the heavens. Hunters believed it carried strength. Spiritual guides felt its energy pulse faintly beneath their palms. Even those who doubted its power could not deny its strangeness. Nothing in their world looked or felt like this. It was as if the stone remembered a place humans could never go, a place without air, or soil, or warmth. And yet, here it was, lying quietly in their hands. Over time, people learned to shape these celestial gifts. They hammered them cautiously at first, discovering that the metal was tougher than any they had known. Blades forged from such iron glinted differently in firelight, a colder glow, sharp and distant, like moonlight on water. Priests held meteorite fragments during rites, believing they bridged the space between earth and sky. Leaders wore them as symbols of favor, as if the heavens themselves had chosen them. Still, beneath all the craftsmanship and ceremony, the core mystery remained. What exactly had fallen into their world? Was it a gift, a warning, or merely a wandering fragment of a universe too vast for human minds to grasp? In the quiet of night, illuminated only by embers and stars, people wondered whether the stone's journey was finished, or whether it was merely resting, waiting to speak its story to those willing to listen. There is a moment in every forge when the world seems to hold its breath. The air grows thick with heat, metal glows like captured sunlight, and the rhythmic strike of hammer on anvil becomes a heartbeat that echoes far beyond the walls. Now imagine a forge thousands of years old, lit not by coal or bellows, but by a simple fire fed by branches and wind. In the center, a smith lifts a fragment of meteorite, dark, pitted, heavier than any earthly ore, and places it into the flames. It hisses softly, as though remembering its descent from the sky. To the people who watched, this was no ordinary act. Earthly metal came from deep within the ground, but this iron came from above, from the realm of stars and gods. It carried with it the cold silence of space, the memory of burning through the atmosphere in a blaze brighter than any torch. To shape such a material was to touch something sacred, something that did not belong entirely to the world of soil and water. The smith's hands moved with reverence, even before they moved with skill. As the metal softened, it shifted colors, from deep shadow into blood red, then into a bright, almost blinding orange. The smith struck it carefully, each blow ringing out with a tone slightly different from earthly iron, clearer, sharper, as if the material was singing of its origins. Sparks flew in brief constellations, scattering across the ground like tiny stars returning to the dust. Those who witnessed it believed they were watching a conversation between the sky and the fire, a negotiation of power shaped by human hands. As the blade took form, its surface shimmered in a way that earthly metal never quite managed. Some swords forged from fallen stars kept faint patterns swirling across their length, wisps that resembled smoke or clouds, or the tail of a meteor itself. Warriors who carried such weapons walked differently, not with arrogance, but with the quiet certainty of someone chosen. They believed the sword was more than a tool. It was a guardian, a judge, a piece of the cosmos entrusted to them for reasons only the sky understood. In rituals, such blades were placed on altars, their edges reflecting firelight like shards of frozen lightning. Priests offered prayers to them, not because they believed the swords possessed spirits, but because something in their presence demanded acknowledgement. Swords of star metal were used to swear oaths, to decide inheritances, to bless journeys. Even when their edges dulled, they were never discarded. They were buried with honor or hidden in shrines where only the quiet wind could find them. Yet for all the reverence, a question flickered like a restless ember in the minds of those who forged and wielded them. Did the blade hold power because it came from the heavens, or because people believed the heavens had chosen to share their strength? A sword is only metal, and yet a sword forged from a fallen star feels like more, like a reminder that the universe is not as distant as it seems. As warriors slept beside such blades, they often dreamed of the sky, of fire trailing across darkness, of being part of a story older than their own. And perhaps in some small way, the swords dreamed too. There is something strangely intimate about the moment a ring slides onto a finger, or when a crown is lowered onto a brow. The object itself is small, yet the meaning it carries settles over a person like a mantle they may never fully shrug off. To ancient eyes, metal shaped into a circle was not merely jewelry. It was a bond, a vow, a symbol of a destiny newly claimed. The smooth curve of a ring suggested eternity, while the weight of a crown pressed a reminder of responsibility into skin and bone. Imagine a ring hammered from a piece of sky iron, its surface mottled with faint patterns left by fire and the celestial wanderings of the metal itself. When placed on the hand of a leader, it felt as though something unseen had closed its grip around their life. The people who witnessed the ritual did not see a ring. They saw an invisible network of expectations, hopes, and fears forming a halo around the wearer. And the wearer, in turn, felt the tug of those threads with every gesture. Crowns were even stranger things. Before they were symbols of monarchy, in the way we understand, they were circlets used in sacred rites, sometimes made of metal, sometimes of bone or woven branches, always meant to mark a person as one touched by something beyond themselves. When the earliest crowns of metal appeared, forged from meteorite iron or sacred ores, the transformation of the wearer seemed almost physical. Observers whispered that the wearer looked taller or older or somehow less human for a moment. It wasn't the object that changed them. It was the belief pouring into them from every watching pair of eyes. These relics of authority were handled with caution. When not worn, they rested on altars or within carved boxes lined with cloth. Their presence altered the rooms they occupied, radiating significance like heat from a smoldering ember. Children who played nearby lowered their voices without knowing why. Adults passed them with a touch of hesitation. A ring or crown belonging to an ancestor seemed almost to breathe with the memories of those who had worn it before. Victories, losses, vows kept and broken. And yet, the burden was never entirely the object's fault. A ring is only metal. A crown is only shaped ore. But when hundreds of stories gather around them, layering hope upon fear, upon expectation, the weight becomes real. Leaders would sometimes remove their rings at night and feel their hands grow lighter. Some would set their crowns aside and stare at them for long minutes, wondering whether they shaped their destiny or merely reflected it. In the quiet of ancient chambers, lit by oil lamps, the air thick with the scent of burning wicks and warm metal, the question lingered. Who truly holds the power? The person or the object they wear? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere between. Perhaps the relics do not grant power, but remind the bearer of what was always inside them, waiting to be awakened. Or perhaps the stories people weave around these objects are so strong that the objects themselves begin to hum with a presence that is no longer entirely imagined. Either way, rings and crowns endure, not because metal lasts, but because meaning does. Before glass, mirrors were not the cold, perfect reflectors we know. They were polished bronze, dark obsidian, or bowls of still water cupped in stone. To look into one was to peer into a softened, wavering version of yourself, a self shaped as much by shadows and flame as by bone and skin. The face staring back was familiar, yet estranged, as though separated by a thin veil between worlds. For that reason, mirrors became relics of mystery long before they became tools of vanity. Imagine an obsidian mirror freshly polished by an artisan who spent days rubbing its surface with ash and sand until it shone like a fragment of night. When placed near a fire, it did not merely reflect. It breathed with the shifting light, swallowing some flames and revealing others. People who glanced into it during quiet moments sometimes felt as if the mirror were offering them not their face, but their truth, the things they carried behind their expressions, too subtle to see in ordinary light. Priests used mirrors to seek omens, holding them up to the rising sun or lowering them into moonlit water. They watched how light pooled in the dark surface, whether the reflection trembled, whether shadows lengthened across it. Lovers consulted mirrors before important choices, hoping to sense a whisper of affirmation or warning. And travelers held them before their faces at dusk, searching for signs of misfortune in their own tired eyes. Whether the mirror offered guidance or merely reflected their own anxieties did not matter. The belief gave the experience weight. Some mirrors were treated like living companions. They were wrapped in cloth when not in use, fed light each morning by being placed near the hearth, and never allowed to face certain parts of a home for fear of drawing misfortune. People believed mirrors could trap spirits, memories, and even echoes of the dead. A mirror belonging to an ancestor was approached with reverence, for who knew what it had witnessed? What sorrows or joys had played out in its surface? What truths had it been forced to hold? The idea that a mirror might refuse to lie, might show not only appearance, but intention, made it both a comfort and a threat. A warrior might study their reflection before battle, seeking signs of doubt. A mother might gaze into one while holding her child, hoping to glimpse the promise of a safe future. Yet many avoided mirrors at night, when lamplight cast trembling shapes across their depths. In darkness, reflections seemed too willing to shift, too eager to reveal what daylight kept hidden. And always the question lingered: What does a mirror see when it looks back at us? Perhaps it reflects more than faces. Perhaps it reflects the stories that live behind them, the truths we try to carry quietly. In ancient times, gazing into a mirror was not about recognizing oneself. It was about meeting oneself, the way one meets a stranger in the half-light and feels an inexplicable familiarity. Even now, when mirrors are more precise, the feeling sometimes remains that the reflection knows something we do not yet have words for and waits patiently for us to understand. When ancient hands lifted a piece of metal shaped from the scattered remnants of stars, something subtle shifted in the human imagination. Metal was no longer just a tool for survival, forged into blades for cutting or points for hunting. It began to take on a different life, one woven from dreams, symbols, and a desire to understand forces larger than anything seen on Earth. A small object fashioned from celestial iron, an amulet, a ring, a disc engraved with symbols, felt like a message from a world that lay far beyond human reach. Imagine a craftsman bending over a slab of cooling metal, tracing lines into its surface with the careful patience of someone translating whispered words. The metal bears the marks willingly, soft enough to shape, strong enough to last. Into it they carve suns, spirals, branching patterns, perhaps images of local gods or creatures from the sky. These symbols are not random. They are attempts to speak to the unknown, to bind stories into matter, so that the object becomes a bridge between thought and form. In quiet rooms filled with smoke from oil lamps, priests and elders studied such objects, tilting them to catch the light, watching the way shadows deepened the gouged symbols. They believed metal could hold intention, that it could store the energy of prayers or channel strength from deities whose names carried weight. A small medallion inscribed with a pattern was not merely decoration, it was a diagram of meaning, a blueprint of how humans hoped the universe might respond to their fear, courage, or longing. Metal artifacts were placed on altars, scattered beneath foundations, buried with the dead, carried into battle. They served as tokens of commitment, reminders of promises, or witnesses to oaths spoken softly in the presence of fire and stone. The bridge they formed was not literal. It was emotional, spiritual. When someone held an object forged from the heavens and carved with earthly symbols, they felt tied to two realms at once, the familiar and the unfathomable. In time, these objects shaped rituals. A metal disc thrown upon sacred ground tended to land in a certain way that people interpreted as divine guidance. A small pendant warmed by body heat was believed to pulse with a will of its own. A forged charm, placed in the hand of a frightened child, seemed to ease their trembling. Whether the metal contained power or merely reflected human need, it mattered little. The experience itself became real, the comfort undeniable. Even now, pieces of ancient metal bearing forgotten symbols feel charged with quiet importance. Museums present them as archaeological finds, yet visitors sense the lingering atmosphere around them, the gravity of centuries of belief pressed into their cool surfaces. They are relics of an era when every line carved into metal felt like a question posed to the universe. And though the answers never came in words, people continued to shape, wear, and cherish these objects because they offered something even more powerful than certainty: connection. Metal, forged in fire, touched by stars, carved with human hands, became a bridge across time and faith. A reminder that meaning does not live in the material alone, but in the stories, hopes, and mysteries we allow it to carry. In the quieter corners of ancient homes, where sunlight softened through woven mats or narrow windows, small altars sat like still hearts at the center of a private world. These were not grand temples, not monuments rising toward the sky. They were humble arrangements, stones stacked carefully, bits of bone nestled beside small bowls of oil, figurines shaped from clay, and bundles of dried herbs tied with simple string. They formed tiny landscapes of belief, intimate as a whispered promise. Imagine a home whose walls are made of earth and reed, warm by day and cool at night. Against one wall, a low platform holds a few treasured objects. A carved figurine, its features simple yet strangely expressive. A stone worn smooth by years of touch. A fragment of pottery decorated with spirals. A feather from a bird considered sacred. To an observer today, these items might seem insignificant, but to the people who placed them there, they were pathways, doorways, points where the world of the living brushed against something deeper, older, and unseen. Families gathered around these miniature altars in moments of uncertainty or gratitude. Before a journey, someone placed their hand on the carved figurine and asked for safe passage. Before harvest, an offering of grain was sprinkled near the stones, a gesture of thanks or hope. When illness shadowed the house, a quiet chant might rise from this little sacred corner, accompanied by the faint scent of burning herbs. The altar did not speak, but it held the echoes of every plea, every hope, every whispered name. Children learned early not to disturb the objects placed there. They sensed the seriousness with which adults approached the altar, the way voices softened and gestures slowed. Sometimes an elder would explain that the objects were not powerful on their own. They were simply reminders, anchors for the mind and heart. But in the dim light of evening, when the room glowed with the orange warmth of a small fire, it was easy to feel that something more lingered around the altar, something that watched and waited with patient attention. Travelers carried portable versions of these altars with them, pouches containing small charms, smooth stones, or bits of carved wood. In the wilderness, far from home, setting up these tiny sacred spaces offered a sense of familiarity and protection. A circle of stones might become a makeshift altar for a night, transforming a patch of earth into a temporary sanctuary. Even in the harshest conditions, these miniature arrangements created a feeling of safety, a belief that one was not entirely alone beneath the open sky. These altars were quiet companions, reflecting the human need to make the invisible tangible. They gathered meaning the way objects gather dust, slowly, naturally, layer by layer. And though their forms varied across cultures and eras, their purpose was always the same: to offer a place where the deepest hopes and fears could rest, if only for a moment, in the company of objects that held memory without judgment. In this smallness, in this intimacy, the altars carried a gentle kind of power, the power of presence, of stillness, of quiet belief, shaped into a form that even darkness could not easily disturb. Sometimes an object becomes sacred, not because of what it is, but because of what it has heard. Imagine a string of prayer beads polished by countless fingers, each bead a tiny reservoir of yearning. Or a small wooden idol, its surface worn smooth by generations of hands pressing their hopes into its grain. These relics did not ask for devotion, yet they became vessels for it, gathering prayers like dew, settling on leaves in the stillness of dawn. A single whispered wish might fade in moments, but 1,000 whispered wishes pressed into the same object begin to feel like a presence. Not consciousness, something quieter, more atmospheric, as if the object carries a low hum, a slow vibration, shaped by longing. In temple chambers filled with incense and flickering light, carved relics stood patiently, while worshippers approached one by one. Some touched the surface gently, others pressed their forehead against it. A few clung to it with both hands, breathing words into the hollow space between wood and skin. Each prayer left a trace, not a sound, not a physical mark, but an emotional residue that deepened the relic's quiet gravity. As years turned into centuries, relics accumulated layers of devotion so thick that even the uninitiated could feel something stir within them. A traveler might step into a shrine with no knowledge of its history and still sense a strange warmth in the air, as if countless hearts had exhaled hope into the room. The relic itself became a silent witness, absorbing the rhythm of prayers, like a drum absorbs the echo of every strike. Some relics were carried into private homes, where they sat in small niches or rested on shelves near windows. In these intimate settings, they served as confidants more than objects of ceremony. People prayed to them during sleepless nights, spoke to them when grief knotted in their chest, or held them tightly before difficult conversations. The relic did not answer, of course, but its presence soothed the ache, offering a place to place one's worries. When relics traveled between generations, they carried more than a physical form. They brought with them the whispers of ancestors, the unspoken guidance of those whose footsteps had faded long ago. A granddaughter holding her grandmother's prayer beads might feel a quiet ache, a longing she cannot name, as if the beads themselves remembered the softness of the hands that once touched them. This is the strange paradox of sacred relics. They are silent, yet they feel full of voice. They do not breathe, yet they seem to hold breath within them. And though they cannot respond, people feel heard in their presence. In their silence, prayers settle like dust in sunlight, visible only when light touches them just right, yet always there. There is a kind of silence that settles over a room when people prepare to ask the universe a question. It is not the silence of fear or reverence, but the gentle hush of collective breath, held in expectation. In ancient times, when uncertainty felt closer to a living creature than an abstract idea, people turned to oracles and lots, simple objects made sacred by the weight of possibility. Bones carved with tiny markings, sticks notched with symbols, shells etched with lines, stones smoothed by ritual use. These relics did not answer with voices, they answered with patterns. Imagine the soft crackle of firelight dancing across a small gathering. The oracle sits cross-legged, hands steady, eyes calm. Before them lies a shallow bowl, carved from dark wood, its surface worn by centuries of fingers, brushing its rim. Into this bowl, they drop a handful of carved bones, each one a fragment of an animal that once ran freely through the grasslands. The bones clatter lightly, a tender sound, as if knocking politely on the boundary between the human world and the unseen. The oracle studies the way they fall, the angles, the clusters, the lonely piece that rests apart from the others. To the untrained eye, this looks like chance, chaos. But to those who have watched this ritual all their lives, meaning hums between the bones like a faint vibration, a whisper of guidance that must be carefully interpreted. Elsewhere, in quiet rooms filled with drifting smoke, someone might draw marked sticks from a woven basket. Their hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from the awareness that whatever answer comes will change something within them, even if nothing in the world shifts outwardly. A single stick rests in their palm, etched with a symbol whose meaning they know by heart. Relief, or sorrow, or resolve, washes over them, depending on what fate seems to say. In coastal regions, shells tossed onto sacred cloths reveal their messages through the way they land, open or closed, pointing toward or away from the sea. Fishermen consult them before long voyages, mothers before childbirth, elders before settling disputes. Each shell becomes a tiny universe of signs, its ridges and hollows, once shaped by the deep, now shaping human decisions. The power of these rituals did not lie in supernatural certainty. It lay in the pause they created, the moment of reflection before a choice, the surrender to chance, the willingness to believe that even randomness can speak truth when we approach it with sincerity. The objects themselves were simple, but the stories wrapped around them, the trust placed in them, and the stillness they cultivated turned them into instruments of destiny. In the glow of lamplight or beneath the open sky, the casting of lots became a bridge between the known and the unknown, a reminder that sometimes life requires us to step into uncertainty with openness, trusting that meaning will reveal itself, not in thunderous answers, but in the quiet arrangement of small, ordinary things. Before roads carved their paths across landscapes, before cities rose as markers of civilization, people walked to places they believed held power. These were not casual journeys. They were pilgrimages, long, quiet traversals across fields, mountains, deserts, and oceans, driven by the belief that some relics were so potent, so drenched in divine presence, that a single glimpse could change the course of a life. Imagine a traveler stepping out at dawn, the sky still pale with the memory of night. They carry only what they need: water, a bundle of herbs, perhaps a stone from their homeland. Their destination lies days or months away, whispered about in stories. A relic said to heal the sick, to bless the barren, to guide the lost, to absolve the weary. But the relic is not the only goal. The path itself transforms the traveler. With each step, they shed a little of what burdens them. Grief loosens, fear softens, questions grow quieter. The rhythm of walking becomes a meditation, a conversation between the body and the earth. When rain falls, it washes their worries into the mud. When wind rises, it carries their old stories into the grasslands. When night comes, the stars watch over them, a silent audience to their determination. Finally, they arrive at the shrine. It may be small, a simple stone enclosure on a hillside, or grand, echoing with prayers. The relic rests at its heart, a bone fragment, a cloth, a statue, a shard of polished metal. To an outsider, it might look insignificant, but to the traveler, it feels like a living presence, humming with centuries of devotion. They do not need to touch it. Often, they do not dare. Simply standing near it is enough. Tears come unbidden. Knees buckle. Breath deepens. Something shifts inside them, a quiet rearrangement of spirit. Others gather around the relic as well. Some have walked farther. Some have walked less. All carry the same quiet hope. They leave offerings, flowers, shells, coins, songs. These gifts accumulate over time, wrapping the relic in layers of gratitude, sorrow, and longing. Even when the pilgrims depart, the air remains thick with the echoes of their footsteps and the warmth of their presence. The return journey is rarely the same. The path feels different, gentler, as though it recognizes the traveler now. The world seems less hostile, or perhaps the traveler has changed in ways too deep to articulate. They carry the relic's memory with them, not its power, but the imprint of its stillness, the reminder that some places and objects hold space for the human heart in ways nothing else can. In this way, sacred relics do not merely anchor faith, they anchor people. They give shape to the longing that drives them forward and the peace that welcomes them home. There are moments in history when the gods fall silent, not in anger, not in abandonment, but in a way that feels like a gentle closing of a door. Temples once filled with chants and offerings grow empty. Relics that once stirred awe become dusty, tucked into corners, or sealed away in forgotten rooms. The silence is not dramatic. It feels more like the end of a long exhale. Imagine a temple whose walls once trembled with devotion. Priests tended fires that never died. Pilgrims lined the stone steps, and the relic at its center, a carved idol or sacred vessel, glowed faintly in lamplight as though warmed by unseen presence. But over generations, fewer people arrive. The fires dim, the chants thin. The relic waits, poised in eternal stillness, while the world outside shifts like sand. Those who remain feel the change first. They kneel before the relic, searching for the familiar sense of connection, the ripple of reassurance that once filled the air. But now, the feeling barely flickers. It's not gone. It's simply quiet, as if the divine has retreated into deeper layers of existence, asking humans to listen more softly, more patiently. Sometimes the quiet comes because beliefs evolve. People seek new ways to understand the world, new symbols to express their longing. The relic does not protest. It simply endures, bearing the weight of fading devotion with the grace of an old tree holding winter's cold. Other times, the silence follows turmoil, war, famine, grief so widespread that even the gods seem to step back, as if giving humanity space to heal. Children wander through the temple courtyard, playing where ceremonies once unfolded. They approach the relic not with reverence, but curiosity. They touch it without fear, giggling as their fingers trace ancient grooves. And strangely, in these small, unguarded moments, the relic feels closer to being alive again than it has in decades. For devotion and innocence are not so different. They both arise from openness. As years pass, the temple may crumble. The relic may be moved to a museum, placed behind glass, where visitors stare in silence. They read plaques that describe its origins, its original meaning, the rituals once performed in its honor. But no plaque can capture the feeling of hundreds of hearts beating in the same room, united in belief. No description can recreate the warmth of devotion. Yet even in this new quiet, the relic holds its presence. It remembers, not with mind, but with matter. It carries the imprint of centuries of prayers, offerings, tears, and gratitude. And though it may never again sit at the center of worship, it still offers something precious, the invitation to wonder. When the divine grows quiet, humans begin to listen differently. And in that listening, relics continue their work, not through power, but through presence. There is a moment late at night when the world feels just a little too still. A window rattles without wind, a shadow stretches longer than it should, or a whisper of movement comes from somewhere just out of sight. It is in these moments that ancient fears rise softly from the depths, fears that lived in the hearts of our ancestors long before the first stories were written. Illness, misfortune, sudden changes in the weather, the fragile thread between life and death. All of these once felt like invisible hands brushing against the edge of daily life. Imagine a family sitting in a small dwelling as dusk approaches. The fire dims, the room cools, and silence seeps into the corners like a cautious guest. The youngest child clings to a carved figurine or a smooth piece of bone sewn into their clothing, believing it will keep shadows from crawling too close. Their parents glance at the door, then at each other, exchanging looks weighted by ancestral memory. an old understanding that the night is both beautiful and unpredictable. Humans have always feared what cannot be named. A strange sickness might sweep through a village without warning, leaving healers baffled and families desperate. A farmer's crop might wither, even though the soil was tended with care. A hunter might return from the forest, changed, speaking little and sleeping less, as though something had followed him home in silence. When answers were elusive, people turned to relics, simple objects infused with meaning, to build a fragile boundary between themselves and the vast unknown. These relics were not weapons against the unseen. They were gestures of hope. A carved stone placed beside a bed, a feather tied to a doorway, a small pouch worn beneath clothing, filled with herbs or bone chips. Each one represented a story, a wish for safety, a plea for guidance, a reminder that humans were not helpless against the unpredictability of the world. Even if the object held no actual power, the belief it carried was powerful enough to ease trembling hearts. In the glow of firelight, elders told stories of nights when the unseen pressed closer, when shadows lengthened or strange sounds moved through the forest. But they also spoke of protection, of symbols that kept danger at bay, of relics that served as companions in the dark. These stories were not meant to frighten. They were meant to reassure, to remind the young that generations before them had lived through the same uncertainty, armed with nothing but their faith in small, treasured objects. Even now, in a world filled with electric lights and locked doors, that old fear lingers at the edges of consciousness. A person might keep a charm in their pocket during an anxious day, or place a cherished object on their nightstand simply because it feels wrong not to. We may no longer speak of spirits in the shadows, yet the instinct remains. When the unseen stirs, we reach for something meaningful, something solid, something that seems to steady the world just enough for us to breathe again. Fear of the unseen has never left us. It has only grown quieter, settling into the soft, ancient rhythm of being human. Picture a mother in a quiet, firelit room, stitching a tiny piece of carved bone into the lining of her child's blanket. The child stirs in their sleep, unaware of the love being sewn into the fabric. Love mixed with worry, hope, and the deep desire to protect a fragile life from the unpredictable world outside. This act is not dramatic. It is a whisper of care, performed with steady hands and a heart that remembers every story passed down through generations about the forces that wander the night. Amulets meant to guard the vulnerable were rarely worn in the open. They were tucked into hems, hidden beneath layers of cloth, braided into hair, or placed beneath pillows where no one but the wearer, or the sleeper, would know they rested. Their secrecy was part of their power. What is unseen cannot be stolen, cannot be mocked, cannot be stripped of its meaning. Even in modern times, people sometimes tape photographs or small charms inside jackets, not for display, but for quiet reassurance. The instinct is the same as it was thousands of years ago. Imagine a shepherd tying a knot in a thin strip of leather and fastening it around their wrist before leaving for the hills, or a midwife pressing a small carved symbol into the palm of a laboring woman, whispering that it will help bring courage. These objects offered comfort, not because they guaranteed safety, but because they reminded people that they were cared for, that someone believed enough to prepare these tokens, to place them close to the body, to trust them with the most precious things. For newborns, amulets held special importance. A cradle might be decorated with feathers, beads, or particular colors, meant to fool or distract wandering spirits. A shell tied above the child's head would rattle softly in the breeze, creating a subtle rhythm that soothed both baby and parent. Some cultures placed iron nails near cradles, believing iron carried a protective strength. Others hung polished stones or small figurines shaped like animals, symbols of guardianship. These practices were not rooted in fear alone. They were acts of love, woven into everyday life. They reflected the belief that protection is not passive, but active, created through intention and care. When a child cried in the night, parents touched the amulet sewn into the blanket and felt a bit more grounded. When a traveler grew weary, they fingered the charm beneath their clothing and felt less alone. Amulets become meaningful because of the stories wrapped around them. A small stone might be plain to anyone else, but if it was given by a grandmother who whispered her blessings into it, the stone becomes a vessel of family, connection, and memory. A simple knot of thread becomes a reminder that someone waits at home. In the quiet hours of night, when the world feels vast and unpredictable, these small hidden objects serve as anchors. They do not banish fear, but they soften its edges, making it easier to rest. They transform ordinary materials into symbols of resilience, carrying whispers of love and protection across generations. There is a particular unease that settles in the human heart when something goes wrong and no one can explain why. A harvest fails without warning. A well that has flowed for generations suddenly runs dry. Illness sweeps through a household without touching a neighboring one. In these moments of confusion, fear looks for a place to land, and often it lands on the nearest object that feels out of place. Imagine a household where small misfortunes begin to pile up. A vase cracks without being touched. Animals grow restless, pacing in their pens. A cherished tool breaks at the worst possible time. People look around the room, searching for an answer, and their eyes land on a carved figurine brought home from a distant village. It had seemed harmless, even beautiful, when first placed on the shelf. But now, with worry growing like shadow around the room, the figurine feels different, heavier, watching. This is how cursed objects are born, not always from intention, but from fear. An object becomes a symbol, not of comfort, but of danger. Every new misfortune becomes another thread woven into the story around it. The more people believe it is responsible, the more its presence begins to feel threatening, even if its material form remains unchanged. In some cultures, objects taken from sacred sites were especially feared. A stone carried away from a shrine might bring sleepless nights. A bone taken from an ancestral tomb might be blamed for sudden fevers or strange dreams. People believed these objects were bound to places and spirits, and removing them disrupted the delicate balance between worlds. Whether the disturbance was real or imagined, the fear it stirred shaped powerful narratives. There were times when a tool or piece of jewelry, passed down through generations, took on a darker reputation. Perhaps an ancestor suffered tragedy while wearing it, and the story clung to the object like soot. Perhaps several. People who owned it met similar fates, creating the impression that the object itself carried sorrow. Even if the connection was coincidence, the pattern became part of the object's identity. But cursed objects also reveal something tender about the human heart, our deep desire for meaning, even in suffering. It is easier to blame a relic than to accept the randomness of misfortune. It is easier to believe that a single object holds the key to fear than to confront a world that offers no explanation at all. And yet, these objects, blamed, avoided, wrapped in cloth and hidden away, carry stories just as sacred as protective charms do. They remind us that belief is not always comforting. Sometimes it is a mirror for our anxieties, a place where we store our sorrow because we do not know where else to put it. When people decide to remove a cursed object from their home, they often do so with rituals meant to soothe the heart as much as the spirit. Because even if the object is innocent, the fear it carries is real. And sometimes, letting go of the object is the first step toward letting go of the fear. In every culture, there are rituals meant to free people from the weight of objects that have gathered too much meaning. Objects feared, avoided, or believed to carry misfortune. These rituals are quiet, deliberate, and tender, acknowledging that even unwanted relics hold a piece of the human story. To unbind such objects is to release the anxiety tightly wound around them, to give them back to the earth or the elements with respect. Imagine a small group gathered at dusk beside a river. In the center of their circle lies an object wrapped in cloth, a charm once worn proudly, now believed to carry misfortune. No one touches it directly. Instead, they speak softly, acknowledging the fear that has grown around it, thanking it for whatever protection it once offered, and preparing it for release. The ritual is not dramatic. It feels more like guiding a loved one into rest after a long, difficult life. Sometimes these objects are buried. A shallow grave is dug in a patch of earth chosen for its stillness, beside a tree, beneath a stone, or near running water. The object is lowered gently, as though it were sleeping. Earth covers it slowly, layer by layer, until it merges with the soil. The fear bound to it dissolves into the ground, becoming part of the natural cycle of decay and renewal. People walk away lighter, not because the object changed, but because their relationship to it found closure. Other times, objects are unbound through fire. A thread or piece of cloth that carried misfortune may be burned in a small bowl, the smoke carrying away the story that had clung to it. Fire transforms the physical into the intangible, leaving only ash that scatters easily in the wind. The act is symbolic, a reminder that fear can be reduced to something fragile enough to drift away on the breeze. In maritime cultures, objects might be released into the sea. A carved token or stone might be placed in a small boat of reeds and set afloat. Waves cradle it, tug it gently away from shore, and eventually claim it as their own. The ocean, vast and impartial, becomes the keeper of stories too heavy for humans to carry. These rituals do not erase history. They do not rewrite the past, but they shift the emotional weight of the object from the hands of the living back into the world around them. The process acknowledges that relics, whether cherished or feared, are bound to human emotion. To unbind them is to recognize that their power came from belief, and belief can change. Even in modern times, people perform small acts of unbinding without realizing their ancient roots. Someone might throw a troubling memento into a river, donate an object that brings unease, or bury a symbol of heartbreak beneath a favorite tree. These acts carry the same quiet intention: to release what no longer serves, to reclaim peace, to make space for new stories. Unbinding rituals reveal a simple truth: letting go is its own form of healing. There is a curious duality in the world of relics. The same object that protects one person may terrify another. A charm carried for luck might be blamed for misfortune years later. A relic once revered in a household may, in a different generation, be locked away for fear of its influence. This thin line between guardian and threat shows how fluid belief truly is, how it changes shape depending on the stories we tell ourselves and the emotional landscape of the moment. Imagine an amulet passed through a family for centuries. In its earliest days, it hung around a warrior's neck, believed to shield him from harm. He returned from battle alive, and the amulet gained a reputation as a guardian. Later, a different owner wore it during a season of hardship. Poor harvests, illness, heartbreak. The amulet did nothing to cause these events, yet it became tied to them in the collective memory of the family. Over generations, this single object carried two contradictory stories: salvation and sorrow. This duality is not rare. It is woven into the fabric of human experience. Objects outlast their original contexts. They watch new families grow, live through new epochs, survive migrations and catastrophes. With each chapter of their existence, new stories layer over old ones, until the relic becomes a vessel filled with both light and shadow. It stands at the threshold between protection and threat, inviting interpretation rather than dictating it. The guardian-threat paradox often reveals more about people than the objects themselves. When someone feels confident, the relic becomes a symbol of certainty. When fear grows, the same relic becomes suspect. It is as if the object reflects the inner weather of its owner, absorbing emotional storms and bright days alike. In ancient ceremonies, this dual nature was acknowledged openly. Relics were cleansed regularly, washed with water from sacred springs, passed through smoke, or bathed in moonlight. These rituals were not merely symbolic. They were reminders that meaning must be tended, renewed, and reinterpreted as life changes. A relic left unattended for too long could gather stories like dust, becoming heavy with ambiguity. Cared for, it remained a companion rather than a burden. In private moments, people negotiated with their relics. A woman might whisper gratitude to a charm she believed protected her child, yet also tuck it away during storms in case it attracted unwanted attention. A traveler might trust a carved token to guide them through forests, yet sleep with it under their pillow to keep its power close and contained. These contradictions were not seen as flaws, but as natural. Humans live with conflicting emotions. So do the objects that accompany them. Ultimately, the line between guardian and threat is drawn not by the object, but by the stories we weave around it. And those stories shift with time, with circumstance, with the quiet evolution of belief. A relic becomes what we need it to be: a shield, a warning, a reminder of the fragile beauty of uncertainty. There are places in the world where healing seems to rise naturally from the ground. Springs hidden in forest clearings, stones warmed by sunlight beside ancient paths, pools of water so still they appear to hold the sky itself. Long before medicine had names and formulas, people turned to these places carrying relics of hope: a woven charm, a carved stone, a scrap of cloth believed to hold the power of recovery. These objects did not cure illness by force. Instead, they guided the heart toward a place where healing could begin. Imagine a path leading to a sacred spring. The air cools before you see the water. Leaves whisper overhead, and the scent of damp earth fills the space between breaths. Travelers come from distant villages, some limping, some carried, some weary from grief that will not ease. In their hands, they hold small tokens meant to absorb or carry healing energies. A river stone wrapped in twine, a tiny figurine shaped from clay, a strip of bark inscribed with symbols. These objects are not magical on their own, but they hold the quiet faith of those who carry them. At the spring, the water glitters with an inner light, fed from deep places in the earth where heat and minerals mingle. People dip their tokens into the water, watching as ripples distort the reflection of sky and trees. They whisper prayers, sometimes for themselves, sometimes for loved ones. Some leave offerings, a single flower, a pinch of grain, a piece of cloth tied around a branch nearby. The relics become soaked, heavy, infused with the cool strength of the spring, and as they dry in the warmth of the sun, their owners feel a subtle easing within themselves. In some regions, stones played an especially important role in recovery. Large boulders carved by wind and rain were believed to hold ancient memories of the earth. People rested their palms upon them, letting the stone's solidity ground their thoughts. Smaller stones carried in pockets or hung from cords around the neck acted as reminders of that grounding, invitations to breathe deeply when the world felt overwhelming. Over time, these stones carried layers of touch, warmth, and intention, echoes of healing moments imprinted into their surfaces. Healing relics were not always tied to grand experiences. Sometimes they were part of quiet rituals performed at home. A mother might place a smooth stone beneath a pillow to calm her child's nightmares. A healer might pass a charm over a feverish body, chanting softly as though coaxing the illness to release its grip. Even modern people feel the pull of such rituals without knowing why. Pressing a warm mug between their hands on a hard day, placing a sentimental object on their desk as a silent anchor. Healing is not only of the body, it is of the mind, the heart, the spirit. Relics of recovery, be they stones, springs, or objects held close, remind us that healing often begins with feeling supported, connected, and cared for. They are symbols of resilience, companions that whisper, without words, that the path toward wholeness is already unfolding beneath our feet. Night has always carried dual meanings for humankind, a time of rest, of dreams, of quiet renewal, and also a time of vulnerability. When the world darkened, the unseen felt closer. Winds rattled shutters. Animals called out in ways that stirred unease. Dreams blurred the boundaries between reality and imagination. To wander into sleep was to surrender control, and so people created charms to watch over them. Silent guardians placed near beds, sewn into pillows, hung above doorways, or tucked beneath mattresses. Imagine a small clay charm shaped like an eye, painted with pigments ground from stones. It hangs above a child's sleeping place, swaying gently in the faint breeze that drifts through the house at night. The child sleeps with easy breaths, unaware of the stories their parents whisper about the charm's watchfulness. It is said to ward off nightmares, to catch wandering spirits, to keep the child's soul anchored within their dreaming body until dawn returns. For adults, different charms were used, bundles of herbs tied with string, feathers suspended from beams, shells whose soft rattle soothed restless thoughts. Some carried symbols of animals known for their keen sight or quiet patience: owls, foxes, cats. Others favored representations of ancestors, believing their loved ones could stand guard through the long hours of darkness. Even a small stone warmed by the sun during the day could become a nighttime talisman, held in the palm until sleep softened its edges. Charms also accompanied travelers during night journeys, whether across forests, deserts, or seas. Lanterns decorated with protective symbols swung from poles. Pouches filled with salt or ash hung from belts. The relics whispered reassurance with each step, helping travelers push through the vast uncertainty of shadowed paths. People believed the charms did not merely protect from danger, but also sharpened intuition, guiding feet away from hidden pitfalls and hearts away from fear's tightening grip. Even within dreams, charms played a role, Some cultures used dreamstones, smooth pebbles, blessed with rituals, to encourage visions of clarity or messages from ancestors. Others placed carved tokens beneath pillows, believing they could catch nightmares like fish in a net. Upon waking, dreamers would touch the charm and feel the residue of the dream settle, becoming something they could understand, rather than something that chased them into the day. In the modern world, these practices echo quietly beneath new forms. A nightlight glowing softly in a child's room, a cherished object placed on a bedside table, a piece of jewelry kept on during sleep because removing it feels strange, a mantra whispered before rest. These are all relics in their own way, anchors that remind us we are not alone in the dark. Charms for sleep and safe night journeys carry a simple truth. The night is vast, but we do not enter it unaccompanied. Something always watches with us. Sometimes the moon, sometimes memory, sometimes a small object, infused with generations of longing for peaceful dreams. There are moments in life when a person sheds an old identity and steps quietly into a new one. Such transitions are rarely loud. They unfold like the slow turning of seasons or the first breath taken after tears. In ancient times, these transformations were marked not by certificates or celebrations, but by relics, objects passed down, crafted with intention, or discovered in moments that felt touched by fate. Imagine a young individual standing beside a river at dawn. Mist curls above the water like pale ribbons, and the world holds a soft patience. They kneel, wash their hands in the cool stream, and rise feeling different, though they cannot yet name the change. An elder approaches and places a small pendant around their neck, a simple object shaped from bone or metal. Its weight settles over their heart, grounding them in the path ahead. The pendant does not alter who they are, but it reminds them that something new has begun. Such relics accompanied people through rites of passage, coming-of-age ceremonies, marriages, farewells, spiritual awakenings. Sometimes they were rings worn to signify new responsibility. Sometimes they were cloaks, woven in a symbolic color. Sometimes they were carved staffs, or tools that represented mastery of a craft. The objects were never the transformation themselves. They were the mirrors that allowed individuals to see their change more clearly. These relics gathered meaning over time. A ring worn during a journey became infused with the dust of distant roads. A pendant worn through hardship absorbed the warmth of resilience. A shawl worn at a wedding carried the imprint of joy. And long after the original owners passed, the relics were kept in families as reminders that transformation is part of every life, that new selves emerge again and again, shaped by experience and choice. Even now, relics mark transitions in ways we often overlook. A graduation ring, a key to a first home, a bracelet worn through recovery, a journal started after a difficult chapter ends. These are the modern echoes of ancient rites, the objects we carry forward, because they hold the emotional weight of a turning point. Relics marking new selves carry a promise that change is not something to fear. They whisper that transformation is a natural rhythm, that identities bloom and fade and bloom again. They are companions through uncertainty, reminding us to honor the moment when we stand at the threshold between who we were and who we are becoming. Some relics are born not in ceremony, but in the quiet aftermath of hardship. They are not crafted with intention. They are found, accidentally, unexpectedly, during moments when healing begins to take shape. A stone picked up during a walk after mourning, a bracelet worn during the final stages of recovery, a note from someone who stayed through the storm. These objects become silent witnesses to the fragile process of becoming whole again. Imagine someone walking along a shore after months of sorrow. Their footsteps leave uncertain imprints in the sand. They stop, pick up a small piece of driftwood smoothed by waves, and turn it over slowly in their hands. It is nothing special. Light, worn, bleached by sun. Yet something about its softness speaks to them. They carry it home and set it on a windowsill. Over time, it becomes a reminder not of pain, but of the moment healing first whispered its presence. Such objects often remain hidden. They may sit in drawers, pockets, boxes beneath beds. Their significance cannot be explained easily. They matter not because they hold power, but because they hold memory. The memory of surviving, enduring, finding strength again. In ancient times, healers used objects to mark recovery. A piece of cloth tied around an arm when fever broke. A carved charm given to someone who returned from a dangerous journey. A simple necklace offered to someone who survived childbirth. These objects were not rewards. They were acknowledgments, symbols of resilience carried into the future. Modern people cling to similar things without realizing why. The hospital bracelet kept in a box, the first letter written after heartbreak, the key from a place left behind. We hold on to these objects because they tell a story our minds struggle to articulate, a story of turning back toward the light. Relics of healing hum with a gentle energy. They remind us not of the pain itself, but of the quiet shift that followed, the exhale after grief, the first laugh after silence, the steadying of breath after fear. In their presence, healing becomes something we can touch. Because healing is rarely sudden, it is slow, layered, delicate. And sometimes, to understand how far we've come, we need something small and silent to hold that journey for us. Healing carries us to new places, whether we intend to go there or not. When the wound quiets and the heart steadies, we find ourselves standing at the edge of something unfamiliar. Not suffering, not joy, but transition. And in the ancient world, transitions were marked by relics that guided people across thresholds, doorways, gates, passages both physical and symbolic. Imagine someone stepping out of a long, dim period of mourning. They stand at the entrance of their home as dawn begins to rise. In their hand is a small stone polished by their own worry, an object that held their grief silently for months. They place it on the threshold, letting it become part of the doorway's quiet guardianship. With that simple gesture, they acknowledge that the stone has carried them as far as it needs to. Now, they step past it, into a future they are ready to meet. Threshold relics served as markers between states, between illness and recovery, childhood and adulthood, fear and courage. People placed carved tokens in doorways to signify new beginnings. Travelers tied charms to gates before long departures. Families buried symbolic objects beside their homes when welcoming a new life or saying goodbye to an old one. These relics did not create the transition. They honored it. They allowed the heart to recognize the significance of a moment that might otherwise pass unnoticed. Thresholds invite movement. They are pauses in the flow of life, moments when the old self hesitates, then chooses to step forward. Relics placed at these boundaries echo that movement. They whisper encouragement in the language of symbols. Even now, people mark thresholds without thinking. They hang wreaths on doors to welcome new seasons. They place shoes at entryways to separate the outside from the inside. They leave objects behind when moving from one home to another. These rituals are ancient, inherited from countless generations, who believed that the spaces between states deserve quiet reverence. Threshold relics remind us that healing is not the end of a story. It is the crossing into a new one. From the moment humans began shaping shelters from branch and stone, we became fascinated by the concept of the doorway, a boundary that is neither entirely inside nor entirely outside. A door marks a threshold between two states, a line where safety meets uncertainty, where the familiar world pauses before giving way to the unknown. It is no wonder, then, that ancient people treated these boundaries with reverence, adorning them with relics, charms, carvings, and symbols meant to guide or guard those who crossed them. Imagine a simple dwelling made of clay and reed, its doorway framed by wooden posts, rubbed smooth by countless hands. Passing through this space is an act repeated many times each day, yet it never fully loses its significance. Children pause before stepping out into the bright morning. Adults hesitate as they return from long journeys. Visitors linger at the threshold, sensing the invisible shift between one world and another. The doorway becomes a moment of breath, a brief suspension of time. To ancient minds, these crossings were vulnerable points. Spirits could linger there. Good fortune might drift away. Misfortune could slip inside. So people marked their doors with relics, shells strung on cords, bones carved with protective symbols, feathers tied to lintels, polished stones embedded into the frame. Each object held a purpose, a story, a quiet plea to whatever forces watched over human life. These relics were not extravagant. They were crafted from materials found nearby, shaped by hands that believed deeply in the small dramas of daily existence. Some doorways bore intricate carvings, birds with outstretched wings, serpents coiled in silent vigilance, human-like figures with wide eyes meant to see both worlds at once. These carvings served as guardians, their gaze fixed upon the horizon or the hearth, depending on where they faced. In times of celebration, people decorated their doors with flowers or colored cloth. In times of grief, they hung symbolic objects meant to ward off sorrow or guide wandering souls. There was, too, a belief that every doorway carried memory. It witnessed every return of a traveler, every departure into danger or hope, every whispered farewell, every joyful homecoming. Passing through it became more than physical movement. It became a ritual of identity. The doorway watched children grow, lovers argue and reconcile, elders lean upon its frame with tired hands. It watched silently, collecting stories. Modern life still echoes these ancient instincts. We knock before entering, even when unnecessary. We hang wreaths, talismans, signs, or lights upon our doors. We pause with keys in our hands, feeling the shift between the outside world and the private one, waiting beyond the threshold. We glance back before leaving, as if to reassure ourselves that home will remember us in our absence. In every age, doors have symbolized possibility. They conceal, they reveal, they protect. And though the materials have changed, wood replaced by metal, reed by concrete, the emotional weight of the threshold remains unchanged. We feel something when we cross it, even if we cannot name what that something is. Perhaps it is simply the recognition that every doorway leads not only to another place, but to another moment in our lives, each crossing a small transformation. Keys are some of the simplest, yet most symbolic objects humans have ever created. Their shapes, teeth, shafts, loops, are familiar, but their meaning is layered, complex, and deeply emotional. A key represents access, permission, trust, mystery. It is a small piece of metal capable of altering the entire shape of a life. 2. Hold a key is to hold the power to unlock something hidden, something protected, something that was meant only for certain hands. In ancient times, keys were far more than practical tools. They were crafted with intention, engraved with symbols, worn as jewelry, passed down through families, or buried with the dead. A key might open a chest filled with precious objects, but it might also open a ritual space, a sacred room, a coded compartment where secrets slept. The one who held the key was both guardian and guide, responsible for what the object protected. Imagine a temple complex deep within a valley. Among its stone pillars stands a single wooden door, reinforced with iron bands. Only one person carries the key, an ornate object shaped from bronze or meteoric iron, cool to the touch and heavy with meaning. This key is not merely a tool. It is a symbol of the trust bestowed upon its bearer and the knowledge they safeguard. When they insert it into the lock, the sound resonates through the quiet hall like a heartbeat, a signal that something sacred is about to be revealed. Keys also served as tokens of status and responsibility. A leader might wear a large ceremonial key on a cord around their neck to signify authority over resources or knowledge. A household matriarch might keep the keys to storerooms tied at her waist, each one jingling softly with every step she took, reminding all who heard it that she was the keeper of the home's provisions. These keys were as important as any written law. They were tangible symbols of one's role in the community. And yet, keys held emotional meaning too. A key given in love, a token entrusted to a partner, became a vow of openness. A key hidden away might represent a secret too painful or precious to confront. A key lost could symbolize the unraveling of a relationship or the beginning of a mystery. Even now, we feel the enchantment of keys. We keep old ones in drawers, long after their locks have been forgotten, unable to throw them away, because they still feel like they hold something important. We wear keys as pendants, tattoos, symbols of freedom or belonging. We give them as gifts to mark new beginnings, a first home, a new responsibility, a change of life's direction. Keys open doors, but they also open moments. They unlock memories, emotions, and transitions. More than anything, they remind us that access is a form of power, and that trust, once given, carries a quiet, luminous weight that never fully fades. Before envelopes and passwords, before locks and written contracts, ancient people relied on seals, small stamps pressed into wax, clay, or soft metals to protect their boundaries. A seal was more than a mark. It was a statement. This is mine. This must remain untouched. This carries my voice. Cross this line only with permission. Every seal carried the personality of its maker, the weight of their authority, the shape of their identity. Imagine a merchant preparing to send a message across a harsh desert. They melt a droplet of wax onto the rolled parchment and press a carved seal into it. The wax cools quickly, capturing the mark forever. Anyone along the journey can see it and know that breaking the seal would be a violation not just of privacy, but of trust. The seal contains more than a symbol. It contains the promise that the message will reach its destination untouched. In ancient courts and temples, seals were used to close sacred spaces. Clay impressions marked with sigils were pressed onto door frames or jars containing offerings. These seals served as silent watchers, their intricate designs meant to deter both human and spiritual intruders. People believed that breaking a seal without permission could unleash consequences, not because the seal held power, but because the act showed disrespect to the order the seal represented. Seals were deeply personal. Some bore the images of animals believed to be guardians. Others carried geometric designs symbolizing cosmic balance or ancestral lineage. Some were so unique that a single look could identify the individual who owned them. A seal might serve as a signature, a badge of identity, a symbol of social standing. There were also ceremonial seals, used only during specific rituals or seasonal events. Pressing such a seal was a sacred act, like drawing a circle of protection around a moment in time. Once broken, its presence lingered in memory, reminding participants of the significance of what they had witnessed. To break a seal was never neutral. It was a crossing, an unmaking of a boundary, a moment charged with consequence. The sound of cracking wax or crumbling clay felt like a small rupture in the world, an act of finality. Even now, when we open an old letter sealed with wax, our breath catches slightly. We are entering a private space that waited patiently for us. Seals led naturally to sigils, symbolic marks drawn on skin, carved into stone, painted onto doors, or etched into tools. People believed sigils formed invisible barriers, protecting homes from wandering spirits, or anchoring good fortune to a family. The boundary between physical and spiritual protection blurred. A sigil was not a spell. It was a declaration of presence. Today, seals and sigils remain in quieter ways, in logos, signatures, emblems, passwords. The ancient desire to mark boundaries never faded. It only changed form. There is something profoundly comforting about the idea of a guardian standing watch as people move through the vulnerable space of a doorway. Ancient cultures understood this instinctively. They carved figures from stone, shaped them from wood, molded them from clay. Beings with wide eyes, strong stances, and expressions meant to warn what should not enter and welcome what should. Imagine approaching the entrance of a long-forgotten city. Two towering statues rise on either side of the gate, creatures with lion bodies and human faces, wings folded back like great silent shields. Their gaze falls upon you, not with hostility, but with ageless patient awareness. Travelers walking beneath them felt the same sensation for centuries, the sense of being acknowledged by something larger than themselves. In smaller homes, guardians were more humble, but no less meaningful. A wooden figurine placed beside a doorway might represent an ancestral spirit who once protected the family. A carved animal face above the lintel could symbolize the qualities the household wished to embody: courage, adaptability, wisdom. These carvings aged with time, their surfaces worn by weather and countless glances. Some guardians were believed to absorb negative energy, like sponges collecting the dust of misfortune. Others were believed to frighten away wandering spirits simply by existing. Sharp teeth, bulging eyes, fierce posture. Their role was not to fight, but to deter, like lanterns keeping darkness at bay. At temples, threshold guardians became monumental works of art. Their presence announced the transition from ordinary space to sacred ground. Visitors lowered their voices as they passed, sensing the ancient power embedded in stone. Even if the gods never spoke, the guardians did, silently and with unwavering certainty. In a way, guardians also watched over the inner life of a place. They witnessed every departure and return, every moment of grief or celebration, every secret conversation held near the doorway. They became part of the home's memory, part of its emotional architecture. Even today, we echo these traditions without realizing it. Statues placed in gardens, symbols carved into porch posts, decorative masks hung near entrances. We still feel the need to mark our boundaries with presence, something that stands between our inner world and whatever waits outside. Threshold guardians remind us that the space between places deserves reverence. They teach us that transitions matter, that the shift from one moment to the next deserves a witness. There is a peculiar sensation that comes from stepping through a threshold into a place that no longer exists. An abandoned home, a ruined temple, an empty field where a village once stood. These spaces carry an absence that feels almost physical, like a soft pressure on the air. Ancient people felt this too, and they used relics, keys, seals, guardians, to guide them into and out of such realms. Imagine walking through a crumbling archway, whose stones have held their shape for centuries. Dust rises with each step. Vines curl around pillars that once supported a roof long decayed. The sound of your footsteps echoes, as though the space remembers the countless lives that once passed through it. You are not entering a room. You are entering the ghost of a room, a space shaped by memory instead of structure. Thresholds like these were believed to be thin places, points where the veil between worlds weakened. People approached them with caution, carrying relics for protection or guidance. A key without a lock might be held in hand, symbolizing access to unseen knowledge. A seal might be pressed onto the ground as a gesture of respect. A guardian statue, even broken, offered reassurance that someone, or something, still watched over the threshold. Absence itself became a realm to navigate. It held stories, echoes, shadows of rituals once practiced. A person stepping into an abandoned sanctuary might feel a sudden shiver, not from fear, but from recognition, an awareness that this place once mattered deeply to someone. The relics they carried anchored them to the present, preventing them from drifting too far into the sorrow or beauty of what once was. As humans moved through these forgotten spaces, they left their own traces behind. A stone stacked carefully on a ledge, a flower placed near a broken idol, a whispered word carried through the ruins. These small gestures acknowledge the presence of absence, the way empty spaces hold their own kind of memory. In dreams, thresholds often appear without explanation. Doors leading into impossible rooms, hallways stretching endlessly, staircases descending into darkness. These dream thresholds echo the ancient belief that crossing from one realm to another requires both courage and humility. And just as in waking life, people often reach for symbolic objects, a light, a familiar token, to guide them through. Crossing into realms of absence teaches something subtle. The past does not vanish simply because its structures crumble. It lingers in the air, in the soil, in the emotional imprint of those who once lived. Relics help us navigate those lingering traces, grounding us as we step between what is present and what is gone. The threshold is not just an entrance. It is a reminder that every place holds layers of time, and that by stepping through, we momentarily touch all of them. There is a quiet ache that comes from losing something small but meaningful, an object you touched every day, or kept close without thinking, until suddenly it was gone. A ring slips from a finger unnoticed. A charm falls from a pocket on a hurried walk. A keepsake once kept on a nightstand goes missing during a moment of distracted tidying. The absence feels disproportionate to the size of the object, yet that is what gives the feeling its power. Humans attach memory to matter so easily that when an object vanishes, it feels like a small part of memory vanishes with it. Imagine a person searching their home during the fading light of evening. Drawers open and close, cushions are lifted, coats are shaken out. The lost object is not valuable in any worldly sense, but it was a companion, a touchstone, a piece of the past carried in the present. Its disappearance leaves a quiet hollow, as though something warm stepped out of the room without saying goodbye. This simple experience mirrors something much larger in human history: the disappearance of relics, cherished by entire communities. Objects revered through generations have slipped from the world just as easily as a charm slipping from a hand. Fire, flood, travel, war, forgetfulness. Each has played its role in erasing things once held sacred. A statue toppled by an invader, a tablet lost in a desert storm, a relic stolen from a shrine and spirited away into darkness. These losses become stories, whispered across time by those who remember what once was. In many cultures, vanished relics take on a second life. People speak of them not with certainty, but with longing. Rumors arise. Perhaps the object was taken to safety during a turbulent era. Perhaps it lies beneath the foundations of a ruined temple. Perhaps it rests at the bottom of a lake, preserved by cold water and silence. When a relic disappears, imagination rushes into the empty space it leaves behind, filling the void with possibilities. The emotional experience of losing a beloved object, small or immense, reveals something tender about the human heart. We do not mourn the matter itself. We mourn what it carried: memory, continuity, comfort, identity. A child who loses a favorite token feels the same hollow echo as a village that loses a revered statue. The scale differs. The ache does not. There is also a strange beauty to these vanishings. An object lost to the world is not gone from the story. It becomes a mystery, a ghost relic, something half remembered, half imagined, carried forward not by touch, but by longing. People speak of it more reverently after it disappears, as though absence magnifies significance. In the deep quiet of night, when the mind drifts between waking and sleep, the memory of lost objects returns gently. You may find yourself thinking of a misplaced charm from childhood, or a worn token you once carried everywhere. In that half-dreaming state, the object feels near again, as though it never truly left, as though its disappearance allowed it to belong to memory in a different way, softer, more atmospheric, woven into the story of who you are. Some relics vanish, not because they are misplaced, but because the world reclaims them. The earth shifts, the sea rises, mountains crumble, rivers swell and retreat. Time presses down, with its slow, inevitable weight, pulling objects into the ground or sweeping them beneath waves. The relics hidden in these deep places are neither lost nor discarded. They are sleeping, held by layers of soil or water that guard them like ancient stewards. Imagine a valley where a civilization once thrived. Homes built of stone and clay clustered around a marketplace, pathways worn smooth by countless footsteps. Over centuries, the land changed. Floods came. Mud slid from the hills. The valley floor sank by inches each decade. Eventually, the remnants of this settlement disappeared beneath layers of sediment. If you walked there today, wildflowers would sway where houses once stood. Beneath the earth, relics lie untouched. Bowls, ornaments, tools, quiet as fossils, dreaming beneath the soil. In coastal regions, the sea takes its own relics. Storm surges drag temples into the waves. Shipwrecks scatter their treasures across the ocean floor, where currents bury them in shifting sand. Coral grows over them, fish drift through them, and the sea becomes their new world. These objects, shaped by human hands, now rest in a realm that erases sharp edges, softening everything into silence. Divers occasionally find them, coated in salt and story, but most remain swallowed in the blue depths. There is something profoundly soothing about imagining relics resting in the earth or sea. They are not destroyed. They are simply out of reach, inhabiting a slower flow of time. The world around them changes. Cities rise and fall, languages transform, Entire cultures shift, but underground or underwater, these relics keep their secrets. They wait without impatience, without decay, simply enduring. Archaeologists who uncover such relics often describe a sense of awe, even tenderness. Holding an object untouched for thousands of years feels like touching a moment frozen in time. The earth or sea that preserved it becomes part of its story. The relic feels alive in a different way, softened by the patience of nature, shaped by forces far older than human belief. In myth, relics lost to the earth or sea gain legendary status. People tell stories of sacred objects waiting beneath mountains, or golden idols resting in sunken cities, guarded by the tide. These legends are more than fantasy. They reflect the deep human wish that nothing meaningful is ever truly gone, only hidden. That the past still exists somewhere, intact, cradled by the earth or embraced by the sea. Even now, when you stand at the edge of a forest clearing or gaze at waves stretching toward the horizon, you may feel the presence of things buried beyond sight. Beneath your feet, beneath the water's surface, beneath centuries of sediment and silence, countless relics lie quietly, out of reach, but not out of existence. Their stories continue, tucked into the world's deepest pockets, waiting patiently for someone to listen. Some relics are lost, not to time, but to human hands. Stolen in the dead of night, taken from temples, graves, shrines, or private homes. They carry with them a different kind of silence, one filled with dislocation, longing, and unresolved stories. Unlike relics swallowed by earth or sea, stolen relics do not sleep. They wander. Imagine a temple at dusk. Incense hangs in the air, candles flicker along the walls, and worshippers leave offerings before a carved idol that has stood in the same place for centuries. Its presence is familiar, grounding, as constant as the rising sun. But one morning, when the temple is opened to greet the day, the pedestal is empty. The object is gone. The silence around it feels wrong, like a missing heartbeat. Stolen relics leave behind an emptiness that lingers. People, who once relied on their presence, feel unanchored. Rituals lose some of their rhythm. The air feels thinner, as though something vital has been lifted away. Stories begin to shift, tinged with sorrow and anger. The relic becomes a phantom, more talked about than ever, precisely because it is no longer there. The journeys of stolen relics are often painful. Taken across deserts or seas, they end up hidden in private collections, displayed in distant museums, or traded quietly among collectors who see only rarity, not meaning. These relics are admired for craftsmanship, not understood for their spiritual weight. They lie in glass cases under bright lights, far from the soil and voices that shaped them. Visitors admire them without hearing the stories that once gave them breath. But stolen relics also carry a stubborn echo of the places they came from. People who hold them often describe a strange weight, not physical, but emotional, as though the relic remembers its original home. Some feel uneasy touching them. Some sense a hollowness in the beauty. Human intuition seems to recognize displacement, even when logic cannot explain why. Communities who lost their relics continue to speak of them. They describe the way the object once glowed in lamplight, the way it anchored ceremonies, the way children learned its story at their grandparents' knees. The relic becomes a symbol of cultural memory, something to mourn, something to fight for. Efforts to reclaim stolen relics become acts of healing, of rejoining fragments of identity scattered by force. And sometimes, stolen relics do return. Not always through dramatic rescues, but through quiet gestures. A collector who feels the wrongness and decides to give it back. a museum that agrees to repatriate, a traveler who brings home an object discovered in an attic. When a stolen relic returns, the moment is often marked by tears, songs, and ceremonies, acknowledging the long journey. The object is placed back where it belongs, and the silence around it becomes full again, full of breath, of memory, of presence restored. Stolen relics remind us that objects are not just things. They are anchors. To steal one is to uproot a story still being told. Some relics disappear so completely that they ignite a different kind of obsession, one fueled by maps, whispers, rumors, codes, and dreams. These are the relics whose absences create legends. People travel across continents, dive into oceans, sift through deserts, decipher ancient writings, all in pursuit of objects that may no longer exist or may never have existed at all. Imagine a scholar sitting in a candlelit room, pieces of old parchment spread across a wooden desk, notes scribbled in margins, lines drawn across maps that no longer match the modern world. A single phrase in a faded text suggests that a powerful relic lies hidden beneath collapsed ruins. The scholar traces this hint like a lifeline, unable to let go of the possibility that the relic waits for someone to rediscover it. Searchers come in many forms: archaeologists with tools and training, treasure hunters seeking glory, pilgrims searching for spiritual fulfillment, families seeking missing pieces of their ancestry, and wanderers who harbor an unexplainable pull toward a relic they have never seen. The search becomes a kind of relic itself, something to hold on to, something that shapes the seeker's life. Rumors spread like ripples. A fisherman claims he saw strange shapes in deep water. A shepherd speaks of stones arranged in patterns too perfect to be chance. A traveler returns from a distant land with stories of a hidden chamber sealed by ancient hands. Each rumor adds another thread to the tapestry of the hunt. Some quests lead nowhere. Searchers wander deserts where wind has buried every trace of the past. They dive into dark waters only to find shifting sands. They sift through ruins that yield only broken pottery. Yet even failure carries a strange beauty, for the journey itself changes the seeker. The world becomes vast again, full of mysteries not yet named. Other searches uncover fragments: a piece of carved bone, a metal shard, a tablet cracked by time. These fragments spark new questions, new theories, new maps. The relic itself remains just out of reach, as if the world is teasing its presence, offering clues, but withholding conclusions. The haunted part of these searches is not the fear of ghosts or curses. It is the way the relic begins to inhabit the seeker's mind. They dream of it. They feel it watching them from the edge of consciousness. It becomes a silent companion, as real as any living person. In their dreams, the relic glows softly, calling them deeper into the unknown. Some seekers grow old without finding anything. Others stumble upon relics they were not looking for, discovering meaning they never expected. And a very few, after years of wandering, find exactly what the stories promised: an object resting in silence, untouched, waiting. The moment of discovery feels less like triumph and more like recognition, as if the relic knew they would come. Maps and rumors guide the body, but it is longing that guides the heart. Not every relic is meant to be found. Some are safer, buried in silence, wrapped in layers of earth, tucked beneath waves, or hidden in forgotten corridors of time. There is comfort in this, a gentle acceptance that certain mysteries need not be solved to have meaning. Some secrets exist simply to remind us that the world is deeper than our understanding. Imagine a hill overlooking a quiet valley. Beneath its grassy surface lies a relic placed there with ceremony long ago. Those who buried it did so with intention, not to hide it forever, but to let it rest beyond reach. They whispered blessings before covering it with earth, trusting that future generations would feel its presence without disturbing its slumber. People sometimes sense these hidden relics without knowing it. A traveler might feel an inexplicable calm while walking through a certain forest clearing. A child might be drawn to a particular rock formation without understanding why. The relic exerts a quiet influence, not through power, but through the stories woven into the land around it. Cultures throughout history have acknowledged the wisdom of letting some relics remain undiscovered. A book of forbidden knowledge sealed in a tomb. A ceremonial object buried to protect a community from misfortune. A sacred symbol intentionally hidden to prevent misuse. These acts are not rooted in fear, but in reverence. They honor the idea that not all knowledge is meant to be held by all hands. Even in modern times, people choose to let certain memories or objects stay buried. A box of letters hidden in an attic, a relic of heartbreak tucked away in a drawer, a symbolic item placed beneath a tree during a moment of emotional transition. These personal relics mirror the ancient practice of letting secrets rest where they cannot cause harm. There is a softness in this surrender, a recognition that meaning does not always require discovery. Some mysteries grow more beautiful when left undisturbed, like seeds waiting in the dark for a season that will never come. And that unrealized season is part of their story. In dreams, buried relics often surface not to be found, but to be felt, glowing faintly beneath the ground, humming beneath water, whispering beneath collapsed stone. They remind the dreamer that hidden things can still offer comfort. It is enough to know they exist, even if their form remains unseen. The comfort of buried secrets is this: they allow the imagination to roam freely, painting possibilities that remain untouched by certainty. And in a world hungry for answers, there is profound peace in acknowledging that some truths belong to silence. Some relics exist only in stories, yet they feel as real as anything that can be held in the hand. These are the imagined objects: mythical blades, enchanted stones, sacred scrolls, and talismans whispered about in tales told by firelight. They may never have existed in physical form, but they occupy space in the human imagination with a vividness that rivals reality. And for many, that imagined reality is enough to give them power. Picture a storyteller in an ancient village, their voice rising and falling as the community gathers around the glow of a small fire. Children press close, eyes widening as the tale unfolds. Adults listen with a quieter wonder, hearing echoes of the stories they once loved as children. The storyteller speaks of a relic that was said to shine when danger approached, or hum when truth was near, or open a doorway to a hidden realm. As the tale grows, the object gains weight, not physical weight, but emotional presence. The listeners do not need proof. They feel the relic as surely as they feel the warmth of the fire. It becomes embedded in their sense of the world, a symbol of hope, fear, or longing. These imagined relics often arise in cultures searching for meaning or trying to express truths too large for simple words. A sword that cannot break becomes a metaphor for courage. A cup that never empties becomes a symbol of abundance. A stone that glows with inner fire becomes an image of inner transformation. The relics may not exist, but the virtues they represent do. Legendary objects also offer a safe place to store collective dreams. People dream of relics that could heal their illnesses, restore lost lands, or reveal hidden wisdom. By imagining such objects, they give shape to their deepest desires. The relic becomes a container for yearning, hope nestled into form. Sometimes these objects cross the boundary between story and belief. People carve replicas, wear symbolic versions, or search remote landscapes, hoping to find the real thing. The imagined relic takes on life in the physical world, carried by those who believe it might exist somewhere, hidden, waiting, calling to those who seek it with enough devotion. In a strange way, imaginary relics are some of the truest reflections of the human spirit. They reveal what people value, what they fear, what they hope will one day be possible. They show how imagination can craft objects that feel more significant than anything tangible. Sometimes a story survives far longer than any real artifact could. And as you drift into the soft half-light between waking and sleep, these imaginary relics feel especially vivid. They hover in the mind's eye like lanterns drifting through fog, glowing, shifting, whispering. Whether they ever existed does not matter. They exist now, in the space where imagination meets emotion, where stories become soft shelter for the restless heart. In the end, legends of objects that never were remind us that some relics are made not of stone or metal, but of longing itself. In every era, there are relics that captivate the imagination, objects so extraordinary that people want to believe in them, even when evidence begins to crumble. Hoaxes and fakes weave themselves into history with surprising grace. They deceive, but they also reveal something profound, our willingness to believe, and the meaning we create even when the object's origins are false. Imagine a relic displayed on a pedestal in a crowded hall. People gather around, whispering, pointing, marveling. Stories ripple through the room, stories of ancient rulers, miracles performed, prophecies fulfilled. For years, the relic is cherished, honored, studied. Scholars debate its symbolism. Pilgrims travel to see it. Families speak of it in bedtime stories. Then one day, a crack appears in the narrative. A researcher uncovers a detail that does not align with known history. A craftsman recognizes the tool marks as belonging to a later period. Slowly, suspicion grows. Eventually, the truth emerges. The relic is a clever imitation, created by someone who understood just enough myth to craft a convincing lie. Yet here is the strange wonder. The power the relic held does not vanish instantly. People still remember how they felt when they saw it. The stories they built around it remain. The reverence lingers faintly in the air, like incense from a ritual long ended. This is not a failure of human intellect. It is evidence of how deeply humans crave meaning. When an object becomes a vessel for belief, its authenticity becomes secondary to its emotional truth. Throughout history, fakes have shaped culture as strongly as genuine relics. Some were created to inspire hope in desperate times. Some were crafted for profit. Some were made by artists who blurred the line between devotion and deception. But in every case, the stories people wove around the relic took on a life of their own. Even after a hoax is revealed, people often keep replicas, tell stories, or continue rituals inspired by the object. Why? Because the relic, real or fake, helped them feel connected to something larger than themselves. It offered comfort, guidance, or identity. And those are things no revelation can erase. Consider modern life. People keep objects that have no material value, but immense emotional power. A copy of a famous artifact, a souvenir said to be blessed, a trinket linked to a beloved story. These items may not be ancient or authentic, but they shape our inner world with surprising strength. In the end, Hoaxes teach us something essential about relics. Their power comes not from their origin, but from the belief we pour into them. Whether carved by ancient hands or crafted yesterday, an object can hold meaning if we allow it to. And sometimes, the stories we create are more important than the facts we uncover. The heart, after all, knows truths that logic cannot measure. Some stories linger for so long that they become polished, softened, worn smooth by the countless lips that speak them. Tales of powerful relics, amulets that glow, stones that heal, books that whisper secrets, repeat through generations, shifting slightly each time, like river stones rubbed smooth by water. These stories become relics themselves, treasured not for accuracy, but for their familiarity. Imagine sitting by a fireside as someone begins to tell a tale you have heard before, many times before. You know the shape of the story, the rhythm of the words, the turn of the final line. Yet you listen again, drawn in by the comfort of repetition. The story feels like an old blanket, frayed at the edges, but soft enough to ease you into quiet. When stories repeat, they change. Details drift, characters merge, endings are softened or sharpened, depending on the mood of the teller. A relic once described as shining, like the sun, might be said to glow softly, like moonlight generations later. A relic that once carried the weight of a god might be reimagined as the tool of a humble wanderer. And with each retelling, the story keeps evolving. Not because the truth changes, but because people change. In many cultures, stories were the first relics. They were carried in memory, the way tokens were carried in pockets. They shaped identity, taught lessons, soothed fear. When a child asked about the world beyond their village, elders told stories of relics that guided travelers or warned them away from danger. When someone felt lost, they recalled a story that reminded them who they were. Stories became maps, compasses, mirrors. Over time, the physical relics tied to these stories sometimes disappeared, but the stories endured. A temple might collapse, but the tale of its sacred stone would live on in whispered bedtime stories. A legendary sword might be lost to the ocean, but its myth lived on in song. Even when no one believed the relic still existed, the story held its power. Stories are incredibly resilient. They adapt to new eras, new languages, new landscapes. A tale once told in a hut of woven reeds might later be spoken in a city of stone, then written on paper, then passed through digital screens. Each transformation wears the story smoother, removing sharp edges, but preserving its emotional core. When you hear an old story again, you become part of this polishing process. Your mind reshapes it slightly, sanding it down where it catches, brightening it where it fades. You become a new link in a chain that stretches back through time, every link forged by repetition. In this way, stories transcend relics of stone or metal. They slip through time with ease, light enough to travel in the breath of a storyteller. And though stories can fade like footprints, they never vanish completely. Somewhere, someone carries them forward, whispering them into the soft dark, keeping their memory alive. As stories of relics drift from one generation to another, they eventually reach a final resting place: the listener. The person who hears the tale becomes the latest guardian in a long, unbroken line. Whether they speak the story aloud or keep it tucked inside their heart, they become part of the relic's journey, its newest home, its newest witness. Imagine listening to a story in a quiet room. The voice telling it grows softer as night deepens. The world narrows to the sound of breath and the gentle rhythm of words. Without realizing it, You begin to hold the story the way you would cradle a small object in your hands, carefully, reverently, aware that something delicate is being entrusted to you. In this moment, you are not merely hearing, you are keeping. You become a vessel for memory, emotion, meaning. The Relics story enters you, settles somewhere deep, and reshapes itself according to your experiences, your fears, your hopes. Even if you never repeat the story aloud, it leaves an imprint, and from that moment forward, you are part of the Relics lineage. Throughout history, listeners have been essential to the survival of stories. Without them, tales would evaporate like mist, leaving relics silent and forgotten. The listener breathes life into what might otherwise be inert, giving each story warmth, context, and continuity. In this sense, the listener becomes a kind of living altar, small, humble, but infinitely meaningful. Some listeners choose to carry stories forward. They retell them to children, friends, strangers. Their voices add new shades to the tale, new shapes, new rhythms. Others hold the stories inwardly, letting them echo quietly within their thoughts. Both forms of keeping are valid. Both allow the Relic's story to endure. There is a tender responsibility in this role. It is subtle, not burdensome. To be a keeper does not mean to guard with vigilance. It means to remember gently, to allow the story to become part of you, to let it soften your understanding of the world. Even now, as you hear these words, you are becoming part of the story, part of the long continuum of listeners who have held relics in their hearts. You may never see the objects described. You may never touch the carved stone, the meteorite blade, the forgotten idol. But in listening, you carry their echoes. You participate in their preservation. You give them shape in your imagination. In this way, the listener becomes the final relic, not an object, but a living repository of memory, a guardian of soft truths, a keeper of quiet mysteries. And as long as one listener remains, no relic, real or imagined, is ever truly lost. There comes a moment near the end of a long night of listening when the stories begin to fold inward, as if turning their gaze from ancient landscapes toward the quiet interior of the listener's own mind. Throughout the journey, relics have appeared in many forms: stones carved by forgotten hands, mirrors burnished by centuries, talismans worn smooth by touch, and stories polished by countless retellings. But as the night deepens, these artifacts begin to feel like reflections of something more intimate, the unseen relics we carry within ourselves. Imagine sitting in a dim room after the storyteller's voice fades for a long pause. The air feels thick with unspoken meaning. Around you, the relics of the narrative linger, constellations of symbols drifting through the quiet like embers. They feel close now, closer than ever, as though they have journeyed, not across centuries, but through the inner chambers of your memory. You begin to notice something subtle. Each relic reminds you of something personal. A stone calls to mind a moment when you felt grounded. A charm echoes a time when you needed comfort. A vanished relic mirrors a loss you once carried. A sacred object reminds you of a hope you still hold gently. The stories you've heard feel like they've been slowly guiding you toward an internal space where something treasured, fragile, and deeply human resides. The drift inward is slow, like the soft pull of sleep. You realize that the most powerful relics are not the ones displayed in museums or buried beneath temples. They are the memories and meanings you've carried for years without naming, the moments you return to in quiet hours, the beliefs stitched into the fabric of your daily life, the hidden dreams that survive even the harshest storms. These internal relics shape you as surely as any ancient talisman shaped its keeper. Every person carries a private collection of such relics. Some are joyful, echoes of laughter, triumph, tenderness. Some are sorrowful, shadows of grief, heartbreak, or loss. Some are mysterious, feelings you cannot quite place, but which sit within you like small glowing stones. These relics are neither ancient nor external, yet they hold extraordinary power, because they are woven from lived experience. As the stories of forgotten objects and legendary relics settle in your mind, you begin to sense a gentle truth. The journey through them has been guiding you back to yourself, back to the relic of your own inner life, back to the quiet sanctuary where your memories rest like sacred offerings, back to the hidden part of you that listens closely, absorbs meaning, and transforms stories into understanding. And so, as you drift deeper, the narrative begins to glow from within, preparing you for the final chapter, not one of ancient artifacts or faraway myths, but of the quiet power that lives inside you, waiting patiently to be acknowledged, the relic that is yours alone. Long before relics were carved, forged, polished, or worshipped, there was one artifact older than any tool or talisman: the human body. It is a vessel shaped by time, memory, and uncountable generations, a living relic, a breathing archive of instincts and rhythms drawn from the earliest humans who walked beneath unchanging skies. And though we rarely think of ourselves this way, the body carries a quiet lineage, a whisper of ancient wisdom woven into bones, breath, and heartbeat. Imagine lying down as night settles over the world. You feel the weight of your body sink into the surface beneath you, grounding you in the present moment. Your heartbeat pulses softly, steady as a distant drum. Your breath rises and falls like a tide, returning again and again to the shore of rest. These rhythms are older than language, older than civilization. They are echoes of ancestors who survived by listening deeply to the wind, to the earth, to their own internal signals. The body remembers what the mind forgets. It holds instinctive knowledge passed through centuries: how to calm when comforted, how to tense when threatened, how to soften when safe. Every breath you take carries the memory of millions before you who breathed through fear, through hope, through joy. Every heartbeat is an inheritance, a relic of survival, encoded into the very muscle of your chest. In ancient times, people understood this connection intuitively. They saw the body as a sacred instrument, capable of sensing what eyes could not see. Shamans trusted their breath to guide them into trance. Healers placed hands on skin to feel the stories held beneath. Warriors carried their ancestors' strength in their posture. Mothers and fathers felt an instinctual knowing when danger approached. The body was a compass long before maps existed. Even now, in the glow of modern life, your body remains attuned to subtle worlds. When you enter a quiet room, something in you relaxes before thought arrives. When you stand beneath open sky, your lungs expand with ancient relief. When someone you trust sits close, your heartbeat steadies without instruction. These reactions are not conscious decisions. They are reflexes shaped by thousands of years of human existence. To see your body as an artifact is not to see it as old or worn, but as sacred. It is a vessel that carries genetic memory, emotional imprint, and a reservoir of strength drawn from generations who endured challenges beyond imagination. Your scars, visible and invisible, are inscriptions. Your bones are pillars. Your breath is a relic of survival. And as you settle deeper into rest, your body begins to hum with quiet understanding. It knows how to relax. It knows how to drift. It knows the path into sleep, just as your ancestors did. You need only listen to its ancient wisdom, the soft rhythms that have guided humans through darkness for countless nights. You are a relic, a living one, and within you rests a power older than any artifact carved by human hands. Memory is the most delicate relic of all, intangible, weightless, yet capable of shaping entire lifetimes. You cannot hold it in your hands. You cannot place it on a shelf. And yet memories accumulate inside you like glowing objects placed in a quiet vault. Some shine brightly, some gather dust, some wait in deep corners, emerging only when the heart is ready. Imagine walking through the corridors of your own mind. Soft light falls across shelves lined with keepsakes only you can see. Moments from childhood, fragments of conversations, glimpses of joy, echoes of sorrow. These memories are not static. They shift gently as you move through them. Some are blurred by time, their edges softened like stones in a river. Others remain sharp, vivid as a freshly carved relic. We do not always choose which memories stay with us. Some settle in our thoughts without invitation, returning again and again, like a familiar melody. Others hide for years before resurfacing unexpectedly, triggered by a scent, a sound, the shape of a shadow. These hidden memories are like buried relics, waiting for the right moment to rise. Each memory carries emotional weight. A memory of kindness can make the heart warm even decades later. A memory of pain can sting with surprising clarity. A memory of love, no matter how distant, can glow like a lantern in the dark. In this way, memories are relics that continue to influence us long after the moments themselves have passed. Think of the small experiences that shaped you without your realizing it. A lesson learned quietly. A gesture of comfort offered by a stranger. A promise you whispered to yourself. These moments become internal artifacts, woven into the foundation of who you are. Even forgotten memories leave their imprints, echoing through your reactions, your instincts, your dreams. Memories also connect you to others. When you recall someone you once loved, or someone who once hurt you, you carry a piece of their story within you. Memory becomes a bridge spanning time, linking past and present, self and other. It is a relic crafted jointly by emotion and experience. As you drift towards sleep, memories begin to soften further. They swirl gently in the mind like fragments of colored glass, forming patterns that dissolve before they can fully take shape. This state, half dream, half recollection, reveals the fluid nature of memory. It is not fixed. It breathes. It rearranges itself to help you understand your life, your feelings, your present place in the world. Memories do not disappear. Even those you cannot recall consciously continue to influence you. They shape your empathy, your caution, your resilience, your tenderness. You are a mosaic made of countless remembered and forgotten moments. And in this mosaic, each memory is a relic. Quiet, powerful, uniquely yours. Beliefs are the invisible charms you carry, small, unseen relics stitched into the fabric of your daily life. You do not always notice them, yet they guide your steps, your choices, your reactions. Some beliefs were given to you by family. Others came from experience. Still others formed quietly, shaped by moments too subtle to remember. Together, they create a constellation of inner talismans. Imagine opening a drawer in your mind and finding small objects inside. A phrase someone told you as a child, a lesson learned from heartbreak, a hope you held on to during a difficult season. These beliefs sit within you like relics, each one humming with the energy of the moment it was formed. Some guide you gently, others limit you without your realizing it. Beliefs can be protective. I will be okay. I deserve kindness. I can begin again. These are like charms sewn into clothing, supporting you when life grows heavy, reminding you of your strength. They may not prevent hardship, but they soften the fall, offering steadiness in moments of uncertainty. Other beliefs act as warnings. This path feels wrong. Something is missing here. These internal signals arise not from fear, but from wisdom. They are relics forged by experience, shaped by pattern and intuition. Even when you cannot explain why, your body and mind work together to guide you away from harm. But some beliefs become burdens. I am not enough. I must not fail. I should not ask for help. These too are relics, formed during vulnerable moments, carried unknowingly into the present. They cling like weighty pendants, influencing choices with subtle but powerful sway. Yet even these burdensome relics hold potential for transformation. When brought into awareness, they can be reshaped, softened, or set down entirely. Beliefs often reveal themselves in quiet ways, in the hesitation before speaking, in the way you comfort someone, in the dreams you chase or the ones you abandon, in the things you forgive easily and the things you hold tightly. You do not need to name them for them to exist. They work like invisible guardians or invisible thresholds, guiding you from within. Some beliefs come from stories told by ancestors, others from cultural rituals that thread through the generations. Still others form spontaneously, moments when your heart recognizes something true, long before your mind can explain it. These internal relics weave together, creating a personal mythology that shapes your understanding of the world. And just as ancient relics gain power through belief, your inner beliefs gain strength when you revisit them. Touch them with thought, question them gently, or reaffirm them with intention. You are both the keeper and the maker of these relics. As the night deepens and your thoughts grow softer, these beliefs settle quietly around you like protective charms. You wear them without noticing, yet they illuminate your path with a light older than memory, a soft glow guiding you into rest. Night has always held a certain gravity, a gentle pull that draws the mind inward. As the world darkens, boundaries soften, thoughts untangle. The noise of the day quiets, leaving room for older rhythms to rise. Breath, heartbeat, the subtle hum of memory and imagination. It is in this softened space that relics, both real and internal, gather around us like companions keeping watch. Imagine standing in a vast hall, lit only by starlight, filtering through cracked stone ceilings. The darkness is not empty. It is rich, full, layered with unseen presence. In this imagined hall, all the relics you've journeyed through tonight rest in twilight glow. Stones carved by ancient hands, mirrors gleaming faintly like pieces of forgotten moons, amulets glinting with traces of touch and time. They lie quietly, patient as the night itself. The night becomes a vault, a sacred chamber where the stories of the past settle beside the stories within you. Here, the relics of human history and the relics of your own life are no longer separate. They lie together in the same gentle dark. The meteorite blade forged by a distant ancestor hums beside the memory of your first triumph. The carved bone talisman rests near the echo of a childhood fear. A lost relic from an ancient city floats beside a dream you've never spoken aloud. This is the power of night. It blends worlds. It brings the ancient and the personal into quiet orbit, allowing them to speak to each other in ways daylight does not permit. The mind drifts more freely here, wandering through memory, the way explorers wandered ruins, guided not by logic, but by intuition, curiosity, longing. Night has been a sacred time for countless cultures. It was the hour of prayer, of ritual, of divination. People lit lamps, whispered secrets, listened for omens carried on the wind. They believed the barriers between the seen and unseen grew thinner after sunset. The night sky, the great vault of stars, became a map of possibilities, a reminder of how vast and mysterious existence truly is. Even now, you can feel the shift as night deepens. Your breath moves more slowly. Your thoughts stretch until they feel like soft threads binding you to the relics of imagination. The room fades around you. What remains is the sensation of drifting through a space that belongs entirely to the inner world, a place where stories, memories, and symbols mingle gently, without urgency. Within this vault of powers, everything rests peacefully. The relics do not need to reveal their secrets. They do not need to announce their purpose. Their presence is enough. They watch over the threshold of sleep, like guardians made of memory and myth, whispering reassurance in a language without words. And you, standing at the edge of this vast hall, begin to feel your own presence blending with the darkness. You become part of the vault, part of the collected history, part of the ancient rhythm, part of the quiet power that flows through the night. When you finally close your eyes, it is not in solitude, but in the company of countless stories resting around you like stars in an unseen sky. There is no conclusion to a journey like this, only a soft fading, like torchlight dimming in a long corridor. The relics you've followed through time do not ask for closure. They do not demand answers. They simply settle into stillness, inviting you to do the same. Their purpose was never to lead you to certainty. It was to guide you gently toward a place where mystery feels safe, even soothing. Imagine lying in a quiet chamber, the kind you might find in a temple that has stood for centuries. Around you, relics rest on shelves and pedestals, their shapes softened by shadows. A carved amulet worn smooth by countless hands, a mirror reflecting only darkness, a meteorite blade glimmering faintly, a stone with symbols almost erased by time. They all belong to different eras, different lives, yet here, they sleep together in perfect peace. As your breath slows, these relics begin to feel less like objects and more like presences, silent companions who have accompanied humanity through its brightest dreams and darkest nights. They have watched civilizations rise and fall. They have traveled across oceans and deserts. They have absorbed prayers, fears, hopes, and secrets. And now, in this imagined room, they watch over you too. You start to drift. The distinctions between the relics blur. Their edges soften. The stories attached to them loosen like knots coming undone. You begin to float among them, not as an observer, but as part of the same quiet current. Their silence becomes your silence. Their stillness becomes your stillness. Perhaps you pass the carved stone from ancient fireside rituals. Its warmth glows softly, like embers in a distant memory. You drift past a guardian figure, placed at a doorway centuries ago, its presence steady and reassuring. You glide near a lost relic, swallowed long ago by earth or sea, still humming with the faintest trace of what it once meant to someone. These relics do not speak, yet each radiates a quiet message. You are safe here. You are allowed to rest. In this drifting state, your own internal relics, your memories, your beliefs, your feelings, begin to settle too. They float like gentle lanterns in the dark, casting soft reflections that ripple across your mind. No single memory asks for attention. No belief demands explanation. Everything simply drifts, light as dust in a sunbeam. The night grows deeper, your thoughts slow to a peaceful tide. The relics around you fade into softer shapes, then into impressions, then into warmth. Their presence lingers like a hand resting lightly on your shoulder, a reminder that mystery does not need to be solved to be comforting. As sleep approaches, it arrives like the final relic of the night, a gift offered without condition. It wraps around you like a cloak woven from ancient stories and quiet strength. You are not alone in this darkness. You are surrounded by the echoes of every relic you've imagined, every memory you've carried, every dream you've ever drifted through. Tonight, they keep watch beside you, softly, silently, without ever needing to reveal their full power.